Chapter 1127. They had been tricked. Amu and Lin Xian's expressions turned strange. At this moment Lin Xian suddenly said, "Sir, did you just say that his entire body was blood red?" The old man nodded. "Yes. It should be the power of his bloodline." Lin Xian frowned slightly. "Why did he become like that?" The old man said, "He asked me where his sister went and I said she was gone. Then he became like that." "Oh no." Amu's expression changed instantly. Lin Xian and the old man looked at Amu. Amu said solemnly, "He must have misunderstood Senior's intentions and thought that something had happened to Yi Ling." With that she turned and disappeared into the horizon. Lin Xian also followed. The gravekeeper blinked. "Are my words very ambiguous?" Somewhere in the starry sky, a blood-red sword beam tore through the sky. Wherever the sword beam passed, the starry sky turned into a sea of blood. The power of bloodline. Actually, he could not control the power of bloodline. The strength of the power of bloodline was related to his anger. The angrier he was, the stronger the power of bloodline would be, and the more uncontrollable it would be. Soon Yi Xian arrived at the Dark World. As soon as he arrived in the Dark World, some dark race experts appeared in front of him. Before they could speak, a blood-red sword light flashed across the battlefield. The heads of those dark creatures flew and blood splattered. And Yi Xian had already disappeared at the end of the horizon. Along the way, countless dark creatures charged at Yi Xian. Yi Xian killed his way through and everywhere he passed there were corpses. Gradually those dark creatures did not dare to look for Yi Xian. Because no one was a match for a single sword strike from Yi Xian. Instant kill. At this moment Yi Xian's battle prowess had increased by at least a few times under the blessing of the bloodline power. Coupled with the executing heaven sword and the immortal body, he was practically invincible. Of course, the main reason was that the Lord and the other superpower houses were being held back by Shao Dao in the Great Wilderness Kingdom. Yi Xian slaughtered his way forward. Before long Yi Xian had killed his way to a black Shao Ta, and countless dark spirits had gathered around him. At the same time the dark spirits in front of Yi Xian stopped retreating. Because they had nowhere to retreat to. Behind them was their lair. Around him more and more dark creatures rushed towards Yi Xian. But Yi Xian suddenly roared furiously, and he swiftly swept the sword in his right hand horizontally, causing an expanse of blood-red sword light to ripple out from the surroundings. In the blink of an eye, nearly 100 dark creatures were instantly killed. Around him the dark creatures directly rushed towards Yi Xian, instantly drowning Yi Xian. But soon they despaired. Because they realized that Yi Xian's physical body was too abnormal. They could not break Yi Xian's immortal body at all. Apart from that, Yi Xian also had a shield in his left hand. Tai Chi shield. A sword and a shield. Was this a swordsman or a warrior? However, the dark creatures still did not retreat. One by one they rushed towards Yi Xian. As for Yi Xian, the blood-red glow on his body became stronger and stronger. In a certain place a woman was looking down. This woman was the Tendo. The Tendo looked at the situation below with a smile on her lips. After a while she turned around. Not far behind her stood an illusory man and a skinny old man. She was the one who blocked the two of them. The two of them looked at the Tendo with fear. The Tendo. This was the fifth dimension Tendo. The illusory man looked at the Tendo and said in a deep voice, "Your Excellency, are you going to stop us?" The Tendo blinked and said with a smile, "I won't stop you. You can go ahead." The illusory man stared at the Tendo. "What do you mean?" The Tendo said with a smile, "Looking at your recent series of actions, I really can't bear to watch it anymore. As villains, can't you have a little bit of intelligence? After suffering once you still don't learn from your mistakes. Look at you. After the death of the High Ambassador, you sent the Honorable Ambassador. Now the Honorable Ambassador is dead. After the Honorable Ambassador it's you. Look at you. You haven't even attacked the little guy below and you're already about to dissipate." As she said that she shook her head slightly. "You're just giving him a chance to grow." Hearing that, the illusory man's face turned extremely ugly. The Tendo smiled lightly. "Don't be angry. I mean no harm. I just can't bear to watch it anymore. To be a bad guy you need to have some brains, understand? Now I'll give you a few sincere suggestions. You can go up and talk to them. The first suggestion, don't look down on the little guy below. His growth rate is at least 10 times more terrifying than you can imagine. Once he breaks through his realm or his swordsmanship, I estimate that if you want to kill him again, you'll have to pay at least 5 times the price. As she said that, she paused and said, the second suggestion. Don't use the experts of this universe anymore. There are currently 6 people in this universe who are the best at fighting. The first one is me, the second one is Little Taoist, the third one is a Luo, the fourth one is the guy locked up in his tower and the old man you met before. As for the last one, I won't tell you. You just need to know that among these 6 people 4 are on his side. As for me and the other one, we won't help either side. In this case, if you want the experts of this universe to kill him, you're simply dreaming. The illusory man was silent. The Tendo continued, in addition, you've forgotten one thing. That is the Xiao Ta that the prophet created. If I'm not wrong, that Xiao Ta's Tao principles are about to be gathered. Once those Tao principles are gathered, you'll regret it. In addition, he has the help of the sword sects Tai Yi and the other righteous gods. To be honest, a few swordsmen from the sword sect can beat you until your mothers can't recognize you, not to mention that they have many swordsmen. The dark world that you're supporting is really not enough. So, based on what I said above, if you want to kill him, you'll have to mobilize your own strength. The illusory man looked at the Tendo. No one knew what he was thinking. The Tendo continued, also, Arrow is about to break through. Once that woman breaks through like you, it'll be a matter of one sword. Not to mention you, even the Lord won't be a match for her. Also, that Xiao Dao, do you know her? She's very powerful. To be honest, even I'm somewhat afraid of her. And you've successfully angered her and made her completely stand on Yi Xian's side. As she spoke, she sighed in a low voice. In conclusion, after watching you for so long, you're really stupid. I really can't stand it anymore. The illusory man suddenly said fiercely, are you insulting us? The Tendo suddenly looked at the illusory man. The next moment, an invisible hand directly grabbed the illusory man's throat. The illusory man's eyes were wide open, and his eyes were filled with disbelief. He didn't have the slightest ability to resist. The Tendo looked at the illusory man. Am I insulting you? I'm warning you out of goodwill. Let me tell you, many of you humans have the biggest problem, and that is that you're obviously stupid, but you don't know that you're stupid. You don't have any self-awareness at all. Just like now, you clearly know that you're not a match for me, but you still talk back to me. And you're even so fierce. Are you dreaming? As she spoke, she glanced at the emaciated old man, and the emaciated old man's expression changed, and then he said, I didn't say anything. The Tendo retracted her gaze and looked at the illusory man. The stupidest thing is that you actually wanted to imprison me in the beginning. What's even more stupid is that you actually only set up a formation and sent an envoy. Gee, I want to ask, did those fellows in the upper realm grow up eating farts? Where's their brains? They've lived for tens of thousands of years. With this kind of intelligence, even if I fed a pig and let it live for 10,000 years, it still wouldn't be so stupid. Do you believe me? The illusory man, the Tendo spoke with some enthusiasm, and she said, actually, I still understand what you're thinking. In your opinion, you're from the upper realm and we're from the lower realm. You have a natural sense of superiority, and in your eyes, we're definitely like ants that can only be trampled on by you. But after the previous few failures, have you still not woken up? As she spoke, she pointed at Yi Xian, who was still fighting madly below. That little fellow isn't to be trifled with. He has someone backing him up. You idiots, can you stop looking down on him? Can't you use some brains to snatch the bookstore? The illusory man looked at the Tendo, not daring to speak, much less move. The woman in front of him had the ability to kill him in seconds. The Tendo suddenly sighed heavily. Trash like you won't survive more than 2 rounds in those chivalrous ancient books. The skinny old man suddenly said, Your Excellency, do you also wish for Yi Xian to die? The Tendo looked at the skinny old man and said with a smile, Look at what you're asking. You're making me feel a little awkward. So you'd better die. As she spoke, she waved her right hand. Without a sound, the skinny old man directly disappeared. Seeing this scene, the illusory man's heart was filled with extreme shock. What kind of strength was this? Just how strong was this woman? The Tendo was about to speak, but a powerful blood-red sword intent suddenly arose from below, and in an instant, the entire sky had transformed into a sea of blood. A trace of surprise flashed in the Tendo's eyes, and she looked at Yi Xian. At this moment, the blood-red sword intent around Yi Xian was growing stronger and stronger. Moreover, Yi Xian's combat strength was increasing explosively at an extremely abnormal speed. The Tendo blinked when she saw this, and then she looked at the illusory man. Look, his bloodline power is about to break through. The illusory man was speechless. Below, Yi Xian, who was on the verge of breaking through, became more and more frenzied as he killed. At this moment, Yi Xian was like a god of death. The mad demon bloodline, the more frenzied it was, the stronger it was. The Tendo suddenly walked over to the illusory man. After you go up there, you must tell the people from the upper realm not to send any more idiots here. Especially to make them reevaluate that little fellow. It's best if you tell them what I just said. Finally, I'll give you a final suggestion. I suggest that all of you send out all your forces to break through the universe barrier between the upper realm and the lower realm in one go, and then gather all your forces to annihilate him in one go, seize the bookstore and embark on the beautiful path of the Great Tao. All of you have to work hard, all of you can do it. Kill Yi Xian and seize the bookstore, all of you can do it. As she spoke, she clenched her fists and made a cheering gesture. All the best. The illusory man was speechless. P.S. I didn't explode, but I still want tickets every day. Suddenly I feel a little ashamed. Chapter 11:28. Tendo let go of the illusory man. The illusory man took a deep look at Tendo and then disappeared. When he left, the illusory man's eyes were filled with fear. Compared to Yi Xian, he felt that the woman in front of him was even more terrifying. This woman killed people without spilling blood. After the illusory man disappeared, Tendo blinked and then smiled. You idiots. With that, she turned to look at Yi Xian, who was still crazily slaughtering below, and said softly, This bloodline is very interesting. In front of the Black Tower, corpses were everywhere and blood flowed like a river. Yi Xian had already killed an uncountable number of dark creatures. However, those dark creatures had never retreated. Because they really had nowhere to retreat to. Unless they abandoned the dark world. And because Yi Xian had a strong physical body and the Taiji shield, none of the dark creatures could pose a fatal threat to Yi Xian. Exhaustion. They could only exhaust Yi Xian. However, because of the power of the bloodline, Yi Xian became stronger the more he fought. Great Desolate Kingdom. At this moment, in the sky above Great Desolate Kingdom, countless corpses fell from the sky. Xiao Dao was also killing. Even if the Lord and the super experts of the dark world attacked together, they still couldn't stop me. At this moment, the Lord regretted it. He realized that the woman in front of him was much stronger than he had imagined. At this moment, news came from the dark world. When he learned that Yi Xian was crazily slaughtering the dark creatures, the Lord's expression became extremely gloomy. At this moment, all the experts of the dark world were with him. It could be said that the dark world couldn't stop Yi Xian at all. He had to go back. The Lord suddenly said, Retreat. With that, he turned and was about to leave. At this moment, Xiao Dao suddenly appeared in front of him. Xiao Dao looked at the Lord. Where do you want to go? The Lord stared at Xiao Dao. Miss Xiao Dao, we have no enmity. Xiao Dao suddenly said, I don't like the look of you, okay? A trace of darkness flashed in the Lord's eyes. Xiao Dao laughed and said, I just don't like you. With that, she disappeared on the spot. The Lord suddenly turned his head. You go back, I'll stop her. With that, he dashed toward Xiao Dao. Behind him, countless experts of the dark world fled. The king of Great Desolation instantly heaved a sigh of relief when he witnessed this scene. It would be fine as long as they retreated. After all, the current Great Desolation Kingdom did not have the power to resist these people. Dark World. Yi Xian was still madly slaughtering. At this moment, the aura around his body was unprecedentedly strong. Because the power of his bloodline had completely erupted. Around Yi Xian were countless corpses of the dark spirits. At least a few 100,000. On the other hand, Yi Xian didn't look tired at all. On the contrary, the more he fought, the fiercer he became. However, at this moment he had completely entered a berserk state. The executing heaven sword in his hand seemed to be condensed from blood. No, at this moment it was a blood sword. Under the influence of Yi Xian, the attributes of the executing heaven sword also began to change wonderfully. In the sky, Tendo quietly looked at Yi Xian below. Her eyes were filled with curiosity. Because she realized that she seemed to have underestimated the power of Yi Xian's bloodline. It could be said that Yi Xian's current state was completely capable of fighting arrow. Most importantly, the power of Yi Xian's bloodline was getting stronger and stronger, as if there was no end to it. Tendo curiously looked at Zhou Xian. Her eyes were filled with interest. She wanted to see how strong the power of Zhou Xian's bloodline was. At this moment, several shadows suddenly appeared beside Tendo. The people who came were number 9, Amu and Lin Xian. Amu glanced at Tendo and then looked at Zhou Xian below. When she saw Zhou Xian's state, Amu's face instantly darkened. Lin Xian, who was at the side, suddenly wanted to make a move. Tendo suddenly said, "He's not in his right mind now. If you make a move, he'll kill you as well." The 3 women looked at Tendo. Lin Xian asked, "You are?" Tendo blinked. "I'm just a passerby. I'm reminding you out of goodwill. I don't mean anything else." "Passerby?" Lin Xian looked at Tendo. "You don't look like you're just passing by." Tendo smiled. "I'm just passing by. I have no ill intentions towards you. Don't be so guarded against me." Amu suddenly said, "How should I address you, sir?" Tendo blinked and then said, "I'm Xiao Dao's friend. She knows me." "Xiao Dao." Amu said in a low voice, "Sir, can you make him return to normal?" Tendo blinked but didn't speak. Amu looked at Tendo. "Sir, can you?" Tendo smiled and then said, "I can. However, his current state isn't a bad thing. Look, he's getting stronger and stronger. It can be said that he's stimulating his own potential." Lin Xian frowned slightly. "Stimulating his own potential?" Tendo nodded. "Look carefully. Isn't he much stronger than before?" Amu said in a low voice, "But if this goes on, he'll be in danger." Tendo shook his head. "Look at how strong his physical body is. Also, he has a shield. It can be said that at this time, numbers are not a threat to him unless the Lord personally returns." Amu looked down at Zhou Xian. Looking at Zhou Xian, who was covered in blood, her eyes were filled with worry. The heavenly Dao suddenly laughed and said, "Don't worry too much. If his physical body isn't strong enough, the power of the bloodline will destroy his physical body. However, his physical body is extremely strong. The power of the bloodline is still unable to destroy his physical body." Lin Xian suddenly said, "Just let him continue like this." The Heaven Dao was just about to speak when the space in the distant horizon suddenly split open, and then countless experts from the dark world charged out. Seeing this, Lin Xian frowned and disappeared from where she stood. Amu turned to look at Ninth. "Miss, please help." Ninth blinked. "All right." Finishing, she turned and disappeared not far away. While the 2 women were very strong, they couldn't completely block the Dark World experts. Therefore, more and more Dark World experts charged down towards Zhou Xian. Below, Zhou Xian was slaughtering madly with the executing heaven sword. It was as though he would never tire. Gradually, the executing heaven sword in his hand started to change. Tendo, who was next to Amu, said softly, "As expected, the swordsman's sword changes according to its master. The sword in his hand should be about to break through." Interesting. Amu looked at Tendo. "You are friends with Miss Xiao Dao?" Tendo smiled. "Yes. I am good friends with Xiao Dao." Amu glanced at the heavenly way and was about to speak when the sound of a sword suddenly came from below. Amu turned his head to look and saw the executing heaven sword in Zhou Xian's hand suddenly erupt with a blood-red sword aura. This blood-red sword aura instantly flew thousands of feet away. Wherever it passed, countless bloody heads flew. Tendo's eyes flashed with surprise. "This sword has broken through." Amu looked at Zhou Xian. Her eyes were still filled with worry. The current Zhou Xian was very strong. It could be said that even if he encountered someone at the level of Lord Arrow, he wouldn't be weaker. However, Zhou Xian didn't look normal at this moment. At this time, the surrounding Dark World experts started to retreat, because they were afraid. At this moment, they were really afraid. Around Zhou Xian, corpses piled up like a mountain. Beneath his feet, blood flowed like a river. Looking at Zhou Xian, who was covered in blood, Amu was about to go over but was stopped by Tendo. Tendo looked at Amu. "To you, he is very dangerous right now because he has lost his mind." Amu looked down at Zhou Xian. Zhou Xian also stopped. In his eyes there was a sea of blood. It was so red that it was terrifying. In his body, streams of powerful aura gushed out like waves. His surroundings had already become a sea of blood. All around, the Dark World experts kept retreating. At this time, Zhou Xian suddenly roared. In the next moment, he charged at the Dark World experts. A blood-red sword energy tore through the battlefield. Wherever this blood-red sword energy passed, dozens of Dark World beings were slashed into nothingness. This sword energy tore through the air and was tens of thousands of feet away in the blink of an eye. Wherever the sword energy passed, there was a pitch-black spatial rift. At this time Tendo suddenly said softly, "He is also about to break through." Amu looked at Tendo, "About to break through?" Tendo nodded, "His bloodline has reached a critical point. He is just a little bit away from breaking through." Amu frowned slightly, "Just a little bit away?" Tendo smiled, "I still need to kill some people." As soon as she finished speaking, Xian suddenly disappeared from where he was. A tearing sound suddenly resounded, and then numerous shrill cries resounded incessantly. Xian started killing again. The Dark World experts fled like madmen. However, their speed was not as fast as Xian. Just like this, after 15 minutes, Xian was tens of thousands of feet away. Behind him there were corpses everywhere. At this time the entire Dark World was filled with the pungent smell of blood. Amu looked at Xian, who had stopped in the distance. She clenched her fists and did not conceal her nervousness. On the contrary, the Tendo next to her was very relaxed. She kept examining Xian, her eyes filled with curiosity. Right at this moment, a ray of bloody light suddenly surged out of Xian's body. In an instant, the blood in an area of several tens of thousands of meters suddenly converged towards Xian like a tide. Moreover, the living beings of the dark who were still alive in the surroundings suddenly exploded, and then their blood converged towards Xian, who was nearby. The entire starry sky was instantly dyed blood red. In the sky, Amu's expression suddenly changed, because she found that the blood in her body was trembling. Not only that, her skin started to crack and the blood in her body was about to rush out. What was going on? Amu was shocked. At this time, Tendo put a hand on her shoulder and Amu instantly returned to normal. Amu looked at Tendo. Tendo looked at Xian in the distance and said softly, "His bloodline broke through." Not only that, he also used his bloodline to comprehend the blood realm. Using blood to form a realm, a bit powerful. Chapter 11:29. Using blood to form a domain. Amu looked at Xian in the distance. At this moment Xian was in a sea of blood. In this sea of blood, the blood of the Dark World experts rushed out of their bodies and gathered towards him. At this moment, countless Dark World beings died. When the blood gathered in Xian's body, Xian's blood domain became even stronger. Not only that, but his presence also became stronger. At this moment Xian suddenly clenched his fists. Boom. In an instant the surrounding sea of blood suddenly exploded. The space within 100,000 feet around Xian turned into nothingness. The aftershock of the powerful force swept out in all directions like a tidal wave. When Amu sensed the aftershock, her expression instantly changed. When she wanted to retreat, the force in front of her had already disappeared without a trace. Amu turned to look at Tendo. Tendo smiled slightly. Amu looked deeply at Tendo and then turned to look at Xian in the distance. At this moment the sea of blood around Xian had disappeared, but Xian was still covered in blood. He really looked like a person made from blood. At a glance he was extremely terrifying. At this moment Xian suddenly turned to look at Amu and Tendo. Because the surrounding Dark World beings had either died or fled. The ones closest to him were Tendo and Amu. Seeing Xian look over, Amu's expression changed because she felt a powerful murderous intent. Xian suddenly disappeared from his spot. A sword light flashed across the battlefield. Amu frowned. Did he really not recognize her? At this moment, Tendo suddenly appeared in front of Amu. Xian's sword stabbed towards Tendo's forehead. However, the sword stopped half a foot in front of Tendo. Xian suddenly roared and stabbed forward. The space at the tip of the sword caved in, but it did not shatter. His sword still could not move forward. At this moment, Tendo suddenly pointed at the tip of Xian's sword. Boom. The sword instantly returned to normal at a speed visible to the naked eye. Not only that, the blood on Xian's body retreated like the tide. Soon Xian and the executing heaven sword returned to normal while Xian fell. Amu quickly supported Xian. Tendo smiled slightly. He's fine. He was just too strong just now. He overdrew his strength and is a little weak now. Amu looked at Tendo. Thank you. Tendo clapped her hands and smiled. You're welcome. It's just a small matter. I still have something to do, so I'll leave first. You guys have to leave quickly too. If the Lord comes later, he'll definitely die of anger. After saying that, she glanced at the dark world in the field and shook her head. How tragic. After saying that, she turned and left. She walked very slowly, but from Amu's point of view, the woman in front of her was very far away from her. Who was this woman? Amu shook her head and withdrew her thoughts. She picked up Zhou Xian and looked at number 9 and Lin Xian not far away. Lin Xian looked in the direction where Tendo left. Is it that woman? Amu smiled. If she doesn't say, then let's not ask. Lin Xian nodded. Amu picked up Zhou Xian and turned to leave. In the field, Lin Xian also left. However, number 9 did not leave. Amu looked at number 9. Miss, aren't you going with us? Number 9 blinked. You guys go. I'm afraid I won't be able to stop myself from killing you. The two women were speechless. Number 9 suddenly said, I'm very serious. Amu blinked. You want to kill us? Number 9 nodded. I have this thought and I want to do it. Amu was a little puzzled. Why? Number 9 looked at Amu. Because you're humans. Amu was stunned. Are you not human? Number 9 snorted, turned and disappeared into the horizon. Amu was dumbfounded. She looked at Lin Xian. Did I say something wrong? Lin Xian shrugged and she had a dumbfounded expression as well. Amu hesitated for a moment and then she said, She'll be fine, right? Lin Xian shook her head. She's extremely strong and ordinary people aren't a match for her at all. Amu pointed at her head and said softly, But she doesn't seem normal to me. Lin Xian was speechless. A short while later, the two women left with Zhou Xian. In the sky above Great Wilderness Kingdom, the Lord was still fighting Xiao Dao and the Lord was being completely suppressed by Xiao Dao. At this moment, the Lord could be said to be covered in injuries. Suddenly, one of the Lord's arms flew off and blood sprayed. The little Taoist was about to attack again when the Overlord suddenly roared in anger. He turned around and as he did, the space in front of him suddenly split open. He entered that space and the little Taoist was about to stop him. But at this moment, a woman appeared before her. The person who came was Tendo. Seeing Tendo, Xiao Dao frowned. What are you doing? Tendo glanced at Xiao Dao. If you continue to attack, your injuries will worsen. Xiao Dao was expressionless and behind her there were corpses everywhere. Tendo said softly, Xiao Dao, why do you want to get involved in this dispute? Xiao Dao smiled. Many times you can only get something by giving it a try. Of course I attacked just now purely because I don't like him. I gave him some face but he really thinks he's someone important. Tendo smiled. It's normal. After all, he doesn't know your true strength. Xiao Dao looked at Tendo. If I'm not wrong, you're using Zhou Xian to fight against the upper realm. As for this dark world and those great gods, they're nothing to you. Tendo chuckled. You've guessed correctly. Saying so, she looked around and said softly, The enemies of this universe are not limited to the upper realm. Xiao Dao frowned. The sword sect. Tendo nodded. Xiao Dao said in a low voice, Isn't the sword sect fighting against them? Xiao Dao smiled. What if they can't stop them? You should know that their sect leader is not here. Xiao Dao was silent. There are no absolutes in this world. If the sword sect can't stop them, Xiao Dao said softly, If I'm not wrong, the upper realm has joined forces with those guys over there. They're responsible for restraining the sword sect while they're responsible for targeting Zhou Xian. Xiao Dao looked at Tendo. What do you plan to do? Tian Dao smiled. I just want this universe to be fine. I don't want anything else. Xiao Dao was silent. She knew that the biggest conflict between Tendo and Zhou Xian was that one wanted to protect this universe, while the other wanted to protect the people of this universe. There was a big difference between them. Xiao Dao said softly, unless you kill all the living beings in this universe will eventually be destroyed. Tendo said softly, The upper realm's method is very good. Xiao Dao narrowed her eyes. You want to do that? Tendo smiled. This method can be learned, can't it? Xiao Dao shook her head. It's impossible. It's impossible to make them give up what they have unless. Speaking of this, her pupils suddenly shrank. You? Tendo smiled. It's not just me who has this idea, the prophet also has it. Xiao Dao was silent. Tendo smiled. Do you think I'm cruel? Xiao Dao shook her head. There's no such thing as cruel or not. From another perspective, you've actually done nothing. On the contrary, you've helped this universe a lot. It's the living beings of this universe that are constantly seeking death. Tendo smiled, then said, in the beginning I was very happy when many living beings appeared in this universe. This universe doesn't belong to anyone, it belongs to everyone. But later I found out that there were more and more living beings in this universe, especially after humans appeared. They began to destroy this universe madly. Especially those powerhouses at the beginning. They were so arrogant that they kept shouting about defying the heavens, as if they weren't strong if they didn't say, I control my own fate, not the heavens. As she said this, she shook her head. The funny thing is, they don't know anything about fate. Xiao Dao looked at Tendo. You can join forces with him. Tendo smiled. I don't trust any humans anymore. Because from ancient times until now, the most greedy beings have always been humans. Their ambitions and desires can never be satisfied. Moreover, this youth Zhou Xian you mentioned, although his nature isn't that bad, he only has his family in his heart. He can sacrifice this universe for his family, isn't that right? Xiao Dao was silent. Tendo softly said, I won't destroy them because this universe is already punishing them. The funny thing is, the living beings of this universe still don't have the slightest intention of changing. This time's fifth dimension tribulation will be stronger than the previous ones, at least 10 times stronger. No one will be able to escape. Without these living beings, this universe will become even more beautiful. After saying this, she turned around and left. Xiao Dao was silent where he stood. Tendo wouldn't deal with anyone. She only needed to watch from the side and things would develop according to her plan. And she wouldn't offend anyone, nor would she be contaminated with any karma. She could kill all the powerhouses of this world and the higher realms. Blame her? She didn't do anything. At most, she would occasionally add fuel to the fire. In the end, this was a sin created by the living beings of this universe. In the past, Tendo helped the living beings of this universe, but now she clearly didn't want to help. Xiao Dao's expression was somewhat complicated. In fact, only she knew how kind the former Tendo was. She was truly kind. Unfortunately, Xiao Dao put away her weapon and turned around to leave. Below the great desolate country, corpses were everywhere. When the Lord returned to the dark world, he was completely stunned. What happened? At this moment, the entire dark world was covered in corpses. Blood flowed like a river, and everywhere was filled with the pungent smell of blood. The Lord was stunned. At this time, some of the surviving dark world powerhouses came in front of the Lord. The Lord was expressionless. Who did it? A dark world powerhouse hesitated, then said, Zhou Xian. The Lord suddenly roared, how is this possible? He is only at the rebirth realm. How could he slaughter our dark world? How is this possible? P.S. Have you all started working recently? Chapter 11:30. A long time passed before the Lord calmed down. At this moment he'd accepted the fact that Zhou Xian had done all of this. Moreover, Zhou Xian had done all of this by himself. Zhou Xian had slaughtered the entire dark world on his own. Moreover, Zhou Xian seemed to have broken through. The Lord slowly closed his eyes. The losses they'd suffered this time were too heavy. A short while passed before the Lord suddenly said, the experts from the higher dimensions didn't act? An expert from the dark world shook his head. They didn't. The Lord's expression instantly became ferocious when he heard this. They didn't act. The higher dimensions had sent him to the kingdom of great desolation to draw Zhou Xian's attention. But the higher dimensions hadn't acted when Zhou Xian had come to the dark world to slaughter him. They hadn't acted. The Lord slowly clenched his fists. At this moment, Skyless, who was beside him, suddenly said, they are using us. The Lord raised his head and glanced at them with an expressionless face. Right at this moment, the space above them suddenly split open, and then a man walked out from within. The expressions of the experts from the dark world instantly became ferocious when they saw this man. Presently, they didn't have a good impression of the higher dimensions at all. The man walked towards the Lord. His body was ethereal and it wasn't a corpse or even a soul. It was just a simple projection. The man glanced at the surroundings and spoke softly, I'm sorry, we didn't expect this. The Lord looked the man in the eyes. Why didn't you act? The man shook his head. It wasn't that we didn't act, we were stopped by Tendo. Tendo. The Lord's eyes narrowed slightly. Wasn't she trapped by all of you? The man spoke softly. She's out. She's out. The Lord's expression instantly became extremely unsightly. Tendo. He was naturally extremely fearful of this woman. The man spoke softly, "We underestimated that young man Yi Xian, the people behind him, and we underestimated Tendo even more. So we'll investigate them once more." The Lord gazed at the man. "Then what about the dark world?" Although he was very angry, he was very clear that the only way for the dark world to survive was to stick close to the upper realm. The current dark world could not compete with Yi Xian and Tendo. The man said, "Bide your time." The Lord frowned. "Bide our time? What if Yi Xian and the others make a move?" The man opened his palm and a black scroll suddenly appeared in his hand. When he opened his palm, the black scroll suddenly turned into a black light and disappeared into the horizon. In the next moment, a mysterious force spread in all directions. The man looked at the High Lord. "This is an enchantment that can seal the dark world. If they want to enter, they will have to pay a huge price." With a wave of his right hand, two black-robed men appeared behind the High Lord. Both of them are at the peak of the sovereign realm. Ordinary sovereign realm experts are no match for them. From now on they will stay here to guard the dark world with you. The Lord suddenly asked, "Can you come down?" The man said softly, "We will think of a way. In short, you just need to understand that we are determined to obtain that study room." The Lord looked at the man. "What is that study room?" The man shook his head. "Don't ask what you shouldn't ask. Even I don't know what is inside that study room." The Lord fell silent. The man said, "Wait for our notice. This time we have suffered a great loss. If we attack again, we must kill them in one strike. Speak." With that said, his body gradually turned illusory. In a short while he disappeared in front of the Lord. After the man disappeared, Heavenless suddenly said, "We shouldn't have trusted them." The Lord said softly, "If we don't trust them, who should we trust? Right now only they can fight against Yi Xian and that Tendo." Heavenless fell silent. The Lord shook his head. "We have no other choice." Heavenless looked at the Lord. He wanted to say something but hesitated. The Lord said softly, "I know what you are thinking. You should know that Tendo had the ability to destroy us in the past, but she didn't. I don't believe that she is benevolent or kind. She must be plotting something. If we want to get rid of her control, we can only rely on the power of the upper realm." Heavenless hesitated and said, "But now it seems that the upper realm doesn't have the ability to kill Yi Xian and Tendo." The Lord said softly, "Let's wait and see. I believe that the upper realm will not only have this little strength. Let's wait and see." With that said, he looked at the corpses around him and his face gradually became ferocious. Bu clan. Yi Xian was lying on a bed. Beside her was a Mu. At this moment, the murderous intent and violent aura on Yi Xian's body had disappeared. However, he had not woken up yet. A Mu looked at Yi Xian in front of her with a complicated expression. He finally found out. Don't be fooled by the guy in front of her. When it comes to his sister Yi Ling, he is like a madman. At this moment, Yi Xian's hand, who was lying on the bed, suddenly moved. A Mu quickly held his hand and said softly, "You're awake?" Yi Xian slowly opened his eyes. The next moment he suddenly sat up and looked at a Mu. "Where's my sister?" A Mu quickly said, "Don't worry, she's fine. She's fine." Fine. Yi Xian slowly closed his eyes. At this moment his mind was a little messy. He only knew that he had gone to the dark world. He could not remember anything else. State of madness. A Mu suddenly said softly, "Can't you remember?" Yi Xian nodded. A Mu said in a deep voice, "You went to the dark world and slaughtered many dark creatures." With that she told him what Yi Xian had done in the dark world. After a while Yi Xian opened his eyes and said softly, "Did you break through?" A Mu nodded. Yi Xian opened his palm and the executing heaven sword appeared in his hand. However, the executing heaven sword was very normal. And he himself was also very normal. Yi Xian looked at a Mu. After a moment of silence, a Mu said softly, "Maybe it has something to do with your bloodline power. It should be that only when you activate the bloodline power will you enter that state, and in that state your strength will increase by more than several times." State of madness. Yi Xian shook his head. Although that state would increase his strength, it could not be controlled. At this moment, a Mu also said, "Although that state will increase your strength, the drawbacks are too great. Because you will even kill your own people. It's too crazy. So it's better not to enter that state." Yi Xian smiled bitterly. He did not want to enter that state, but he found that as long as he was angry he would automatically enter that state. Yi Xian shook his head and did not think too much. He looked at Amu. "Take me to Xiling." Amu nodded. It didn't take long for Amu to bring Yi Xian to the cemetery. As soon as they entered the cemetery, the old man appeared before them. The old man sized up Yi Xian. "You've returned to normal?" Yi Xian nodded and smiled bitterly. "Senior, you didn't make it clear at that time." The old man shook his head. "You ran away before I could even finish speaking. Young man, you should be more patient. You're too impulsive." Yi Xian nodded. "Yes." The old man turned to glance at the grave and said, "Your sister went in. She hasn't come out yet." Yi Xian looked at the grave. "Is it dangerous?" The old man shook his head. "It shouldn't be. The senior inside has no ill intentions towards your sister, so it should be a huge fortuitous encounter for her." Yi Xian walked towards the grave, and as soon as he approached it, a powerful dark light surged out from within it. Yi Xian's expression changed and he hurriedly withdrew his taiji shield. Bang! In an instant Yi Xian retreated by over 1 kilometer. As soon as he stopped, the ground beneath him instantly collapsed. At the same time, countless cracks actually appeared on the taiji shield in his hand. Yi Xian was petrified at the sight of that. Amu was stunned as well. That was the taiji shield. A precious treasure of the human race. Cracked open just like that? What the hell? Yi Xian gazed at the grave with an extremely solemn expression. Who exactly is inside? Yi Xian and Amu looked at the old man and the old man shrugged. "I don't know who it is. In any case, someone asked me to stand guard here until she wakes up." Yi Xian said in a low voice. "Who asked you to stand guard here?" The old man said softly, "A man in green clothes." "A man in green clothes." Yi Xian was stunned and then he said, "That swordsman?" The old man nodded. Yi Xian looked at the grave. "Didn't he tell you who's inside?" The old man shook his head. "He only said that it's a very important relative of his. Also, don't try to break open the grave by force. I don't know what the little white fellow and the little girl are hiding inside, but it's definitely very dangerous." The little white fellow. Yi Xian's expression became slightly strange. Could that little fellow have buried Tang Hulu inside? Yi Xian restrained his thoughts and looked at the taiji shield. At this moment, the taiji shield had returned to normal. Fortunately, the taiji shield had the ability to repair itself. Otherwise, it would be too damaging. Meanwhile, the old man suddenly said, "Don't worry about her." Yi Xian nodded slightly. He could still sense Yiling's aura, but he didn't dare approach the grave rashly. Obviously, the owner of the grave didn't allow outsiders to approach it. But who exactly was buried in the grave? The relative of the man in green clothes? Yi Xian couldn't figure it out. At this moment, Amu suddenly said, "What do you plan to do next?" Yi Xian said solemnly, "Has arrow broken through?" Amu shook his head. "Not yet. Don't worry too much. Xiao Dao is secretly guarding the Great Desolation Kingdom." Hearing this, Yi Xian's expression relaxed slightly. The upper realm. Yi Xian raised his head to look at the sky, and his expression gradually turned ferocious. This time he didn't expect the upper realm to have designs on Yiling. Fortunately, the old man was strong enough. Otherwise, Yiling would definitely be doomed. And the dark world. Yi Xian suddenly turned around and left. Amu hurriedly asked, "Where are you going?" Yi Xian said, "To the dark world." Amu was stunned and was about to speak when Yi Xian suddenly said fiercely, "If I don't slaughter them, I won't be able to eat. I want to kill them all." Chapter 1131. Soon Yi Xian arrived at the entrance of the dark world. However, the entrance of the dark world was sealed off by a powerful barrier. Yi Xian was expressionless. He opened his palm and the man-ruler seal appeared in his hand. In the next moment, the man-ruler seal transformed into a ray of sword light that shot towards the barrier. Boom! The barrier trembled violently and then it became illusory. The man-ruler seal. It could break all seals and barriers in the world. Soon, the barrier shattered and the entrance to the dark world appeared in front of Yi Xian. At this moment, a man walked out. It was the Lord. The Lord was still injured. The arm that Xiao Dao had cut off hadn't fully recovered. The Lord looked at Yi Xian calmly. Wu Tian, who was next to the Lord, was about to speak when Yi Xian suddenly disappeared. A ray of sword light tore through the battlefield and instantly appeared in front of the Lord. The Lord didn't attack. Two old men suddenly appeared in front of him. Boom. With a loud explosion, Zhou Xian retreated to his original spot. The Lord looked at Zhou Xian. Are you really not going to give me a way out? Zhou Xian sneered. Give you a way out? Haven't you heard of taking your life while you're down? With that he charged out. He didn't come to the dark world to act on impulse. Now that the Lord was seriously injured and the experts of the dark world were dead, it could be said that the dark world was at its weakest. If he didn't destroy it now, when would he? The Lord narrowed his eyes when he saw Zhou Xian charging over. His intuition told him that something was wrong. Zhou Xian couldn't destroy the dark world by himself. At this moment the space around them suddenly split open. In the next moment, a dozen powerful auras swept over. The newcomers were Tai Yi, Shengong and the others. There were a total of 12 principal gods. They were all super experts in the ruler realm. The Lord's expression changed drastically. Retreat. With that, he led the surrounding dark world experts back to the dark world. Zhou Xian, on the other hand, led Tai Yi and the others into the dark world. In front of the Black Tower, the Lord stared at the distant sky. There Zhou Xian and the 12 others were slaughtering their way forward. No one could stop them. Soon Zhou Xian and the others were getting closer and closer to him. Suddenly the Overlord roared, "Summon the Ancestor." As soon as he finished speaking, the black pagoda behind him suddenly trembled violently, and then a ray of black light shot into the sky. Within that ray of black light, an old man suddenly appeared. The old man was dressed in a black robe. His hair and beard were all white, and he exuded an extremely powerful aura that was as vast as the starry sky, unfathomable. In the distance, Zhou Xian stopped and frowned. Why did all these powers like to summon their ancestors? Who was his ancestor? He also wanted to call his ancestor. Calling him ancestor for no reason at all, it was really annoying. In the sky, the black-robed old man looked around. There was a trace of confusion in his eyes, but it gradually became clear. A moment later, the black-robed old man's gaze fell on the Lord. The Lord and the others hurriedly bowed respectfully. This was a senior from the dark world. The black-robed old man looked around and finally he looked at Zhou Xian in the distance. When he saw Zhou Xian, he immediately frowned. Zhou Xian gripped the executing heaven sword tightly in his right hand. Just as he was about to attack, the black-robed old man suddenly said softly, "Young man, come here for a moment." Zhou Xian blinked. He glanced at the old man, hesitated for a moment, and then walked in front of the black-robed old man. Of course, he was always on guard, afraid that the old man would play dirty. Some old men were very bad. After the black-robed old man sized up Zhou Xian, a trace of surprise flashed in his eyes. Zhou Xian asked, "What is it?" The black-robed old man said softly, "Your fate is so strange. And the karma you carry." Zhou Xian glanced at the old man. "Are you going to fight or not?" The black-robed old man took a deep and long glance at Zhou Xian, and then he said, "May I know why you want to kill my dark world and the dark world?" Zhou Xian smiled. "I'm not the one who wants to destroy all of you, it's all of you who want to destroy me." The black-robed old man turned around to look at the Lord. "What's going on?" The expressions of the experts from the dark world became slightly strange when they heard this. What's going on? This ancestor of his seemed to be blaming him. The Lord fell silent for a moment before he said, "Ancestor, can you kill him?" The black-robed old man stared at the Lord. "Are you an idiot?" An uproar resounded here. Zhou Xian and the others were stunned. What's going on? The Lord gazed at the black-robed old man with a slightly unsightly expression. The black-robed old man looked down at the Lord. "You'll lead the dark world to destruction." The Lord spoke in a low voice. "Just because we chose him to be our enemy?" The black-robed old man shook his head. "You've lived for so many years, yet you can't even do that. You've really lived for nothing." The Lord frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" The black-robed old man's face was expressionless. "The karma he carries isn't something my dark world can taint." The Lord fell silent. The black-robed old man continued, "It's fine to be ambitious, but you have to possess strength that can match it. Otherwise you'll only be courting death." As soon as he finished speaking, he turned around to gaze at Zhou Xian. "Young friend, my dark world would like to end this karma with you today. May I know if that's possible?" Zhou Xian smiled. "No. You can fight if you want and stop if you don't. Who do you think I am? It doesn't matter who comes here today." The black-robed old man nodded slightly. I understand. His eyes were filled with disbelief, but he didn't withdraw his fist. Boom. As soon as their fists collided, in an instant, the surroundings suddenly fell silent, and then the space around them trembled before shattering and turning pitch black. Meanwhile, Zhou Xian had retreated 3 kilometers. At the same time his body cracked and blood sprayed. But he was smiling. He was smiling very happily. On the contrary, the black-robed old man's expression was unprecedentedly solemn as he stared fixedly at Zhou Xian. How could this be possible? At this moment his heart was like a raging sea. Zhou Xian wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth and smiled. Why not? The black-robed old man looked at Zhou Xian, and his eyes were filled with tangible killing intent. He knew that if this young man didn't die, then the dark world would definitely perish. Comprehending a higher realm? That was too crazy. The black-robed old man slowly clenched his right hand. In an instant the space around him became illusory. Zhou Xian sensed the black-robed old man's killing intent and he suddenly said, "Retreat." As soon as he finished speaking he turned around and left. When Tai Yi and the others heard Zhou Xian's words, they turned around and ran. Seeing Zhou Xian run without another word, the black-robed old man was stunned. Was this guy not going to fight anymore? While he was stunned, Zhou Xian had already disappeared into the horizon. In the same place, the black-robed old man didn't chase after him because he wouldn't exist for long. His expression was extremely ugly. Below, the Lord appeared in front of the black-robed old man. He said in a low voice, "What's wrong?" The black-robed old man turned around and glanced at the Lord. Gradually he became more and more illusory and in a short while he completely disappeared. In the battlefield, the Lord's expression was extremely ugly. He knew that something must have happened, because he felt the black-robed old man's emotion. It was fear. What exactly happened that made the old man who was already in the shattering void tier so afraid? The Lord looked at the horizon in the distance where Zhou Xian had escaped, his expression becoming more and more ugly. After a long silence, the Lord looked up at the horizon. At this moment he could only hope that the people of the higher realm would come down as soon as possible. Because the current dark world couldn't stop Zhou Xian. The higher realm. In a boundless void, a woman in a plain dress walked through the air. Wherever she went, the space was torn apart. After an unknown amount of time, an old man suddenly appeared thousands of feet in front of the woman in the plain dress. The old man held a sword and looked at the woman in the plain dress. "You're finally here. I've been waiting for you for a long time." As he spoke, he pulled out his sword and pointed it at the woman in the plain dress. "If you survive a blow from the old man will let you pass." "Peace. I've been locked up at home for a long time. My hair has grown so long and I want to go to a proper health shop to get my hair cut." Chapter 1132. In the starry sky, the old man stood with his sword. There was no sword will or sword aura around him, but he stood there as if he was the master of the starry sky. Compared to him, the woman in the plain dress was frail like a leaf in the sea. The old man pointed his sword at the woman in the plain dress. He was about to speak when the woman in the plain dress was already behind him. The old man narrowed his eyes. He was about to draw his sword when the woman in the plain dress disappeared into the starry sky. She did not even look at him. At that moment the old man flew into a rage. How dare she look down on him? The old man drew his sword, but at that moment his eyes suddenly widened. The next moment his throat was torn open and blood gushed out. The old man was petrified. When did she draw her sword? What kind of sword Dao was that? He could not even take a single strike. He did not even know when she drew her sword. A series of questions flashed through the old man's mind like a flash of lightning. But there was no answer. In the starry sky the old man just stood there. Although it was only a crack, that sword had wiped away all the old man's upgrades, even his karma. Of course, it had also cut off his path of reincarnation. That sword was not to kill but to erase. To completely erase everything that the old man had in this world. This was 1,000 times more terrifying than killing. The swordsman's eyes were filled with confusion even in death. What kind of sword was that? At the end of the starry sky, the woman in the plain dress tore through space. Her face was expressionless like an emotionless killer. Soon, the woman in the plain dress disappeared into the starry sky. the Wu clan. After Yi Xian returned to Shaman City, he immediately went into isolation. In the room, Yi Xian sat on the ground with his eyes closed. At that moment, his mind was filled with the scene of him fighting with the old man in black, shattering the void. Yi Xian knew that this was his chance. Understanding beyond his level? Might sound absurd, but it was not impossible. He must have dreams. He must dare to think. Outside the door, Amu looked at Yi Xian's room with curiosity. When Yi Xian came back, although he was injured, he looked very happy. At this time, Priest suddenly appeared beside Amu. He glanced at Yi Xian's room and asked, "What is he doing?" Amu whispered, "It looks like he's about to break through." Breakthrough. The priest blinked. Another breakthrough? Amu nodded. Awesome, right? Divine Master. Amu looked at Qian. Is something the matter? Qian nodded. I want to discuss something with him. Amu asked, what is it? Qian whispered, let's wait for him to come out. Amu nodded. How is the situation with the Celestials? Qian said, most of them are still recuperating. Fortunately, they have his purple gas. Otherwise, this injury might not recover in a short period of time. As she said that, she looked at Amu. Someone from the upper realm has intervened. Tendo is watching from the sidelines. I think we can't just sit around and wait for death. We have to do something. Amu blinked. What should we do? Qian thought about it and said, why don't we move to the sword sect? Didn't that swordsman ask us to go to the sword sect as a guest? I think we can go play. Amu said in a deep voice, but he didn't say the address. Qian blinked. That's right. He didn't say the address, but he asked us to go play. The two women. In the room, Yi Xian sat cross-legged on the ground. At this moment he was already meditating. About 4 hours later, Yi Xian suddenly opened his eyes. He stood up and displayed sword domain. In the next moment his right hand slowly clenched, and in an instant the space inside sword domain directly became illusory. Seeing this scene, Yi Xian was instantly excited. Shattering void. He could now achieve shattering void. However, he could only achieve shattering void with the help of sword domain. Without sword domain he couldn't achieve the state of shattering void. Strictly speaking, he still wasn't considered a shattering void tier elite, but he already had the ability of the shattering void tier. Yi Xian smiled and left the room. Outside, Amu and the two women had been waiting for a long time. Yi Xian looked at Qian. Divine Master. Qian nodded slightly. She sized up Yi Xian. You broke through. Yi Xian smiled. Sort of. Quite a harvest. Qian smiled. Congratulations. Yi Xian smiled and said, Divine Master, what brings you here? Qian nodded. This time I came to discuss our future path with you. Yi Xian was just about to speak when the unusual beast scripture suddenly appeared in front of Yi Xian. Yi Xian looked at the unusual beast scripture. The unusual beast scripture said, You speak, I'm listening. Qian said in a deep voice, the people of the higher realm definitely won't let it go. They haven't made a move now because they've already suffered twice and learned to be smart. But next time they'll definitely be fully prepared. As she spoke, she looked at Yi Xian. So we have to prepare in advance. Yi Xian nodded. But now there's a problem, and that's that we don't even know where they are. Qian said, Xiao Dao knows. Right at this moment Xiao Dao suddenly appeared and she glanced at them. Don't even think about counterattacking. Their place isn't somewhere you can go right now. Yi Xian frowned slightly. Then why can they come down? Xiao Dao said indifferently, Have you seen them come down? They haven't really come down until now. Yi Xian suddenly asked. They can't come down? Xiao Dao shook her head. No, they can come down, but they have to pay a huge price. One of the prices is that their realm will be suppressed. Yi Xian was slightly puzzled. Why would they be suppressed? Xiao Dao smiled. The laws of the universe. In this universe there are some laws that can't be defied. Yi Xian asked again. The laws of the universe. Who came up with? Xiao Dao suddenly said, Stop, I can't stand you. Yi Xian. Xiao Dao shook her head. The laws of the universe aren't created by anyone. They exist by themselves. Just like this world, there will be wind and rain, day and night for seasons. These are the laws of the universe. Here and above there are laws of the universe. Whether these laws exist naturally or man-made, I have never studied them, just like how you would study why there is day and night. Xian shook his head. He wasn't bored, so why would he study this? At this moment Xiao Dao suddenly said, "The prophet will study it, and he will study it thoroughly." Xian was puzzled. Why would he study this? Xiao Dao said softly, "In his words, it's to pursue the truth." Xian frowned. Truth. Xiao Dao nodded. Strictly speaking, he is a scholar. Strictly speaking, he is a scholar. Xian wanted to ask something else, but Amu suddenly rolled her eyes at him. Get to the point. Xian smiled and said, "Miss Xiao Dao, you just said that the people from the upper realm will have their realms suppressed when they come down?" Xiao Dao nodded. The stronger the person, the harder the suppression. This is also why they don't come down personally, but use the people of this world to deal with you. It's not that they don't want to come down, but the price they have to pay is too high. However, if they don't give up on your study house, they won't stop. Xian said softly, "In other words, they will continue to send people down, right?" Xiao Dao nodded slightly. The worst-case scenario is that they will come down personally. If they have some special method to come down without being suppressed, you will be in danger. Xian said in a low voice, "Is there a big difference in strength between us and the people above?" Xiao Dao shook her head. "It's not very big. Their place is not much different than here. Of course, I'm talking about the martial arts civilization." Xian was stunned. At this time Xiao Dao said again, "However, they have a lot of people and each of them is a huge force. If you are above, your strength is really not enough to deal with them." Xian looked at Xiao Dao. "Miss Xiao Dao understands the people above very well?" Xiao Dao said calmly, "Very well. Why, is there a problem?" Xian blinked. "Miss Xiao Dao also comes from above?" Xiao Dao looked at Xian. "Do you still want to ask questions?" Xian. Amu rolled his eyes at Xian and then he looked at Xiao Dao. "Miss Xiao Dao, do you have any suggestions?" Xiao Dao fell silent for a moment before she said, "There are only 3 things that you have to worry about now. Firstly, they will stop at nothing to send experts down to fight you to the death. If they do that, then you will be the ones that will suffer the most. Of course, they will suffer the same. Secondly, they have joined forces with the Yin spirits guarding the Sword Sect. No, they have already joined forces. Even though the Sword Sect is extremely strong, if they help those Yin spirits, then the Sword Sect will still be in danger. Because the sect master of the Sword Sect isn't here right now." Xian frowned slightly. "Are those Yin spirits that strong?" Xiao Dao said flatly, "What do you think? If they aren't strong, then would the Sword Sect need to guard it for so many years? The most terrifying thing about those Yin spirits is that they can transform all living beings into Yin spirits. So long as they come into contact with someone, then that person will become one of them. Can be said that one has to be at least at the rebirth realm to be able to resist them. Anyone below the rebirth realm wouldn't be able to resist them at all." Amu's beautiful brows knit together slightly. "They're that strong?" Xiao Dao nodded. "They're extraordinarily strong. That special ability of those Yin spirits is truly too terrifying. Let me tell you that not to mention this dimension, even those fellows in the immortal dimension wouldn't be able to resist those Yin spirits. No matter what race or living being it is, they'll become one of them wherever they go." The expressions of everyone here became solemn when they heard this. Such an ability was too terrifying indeed. No, it was simply abnormal. It was obvious that if they came to this universe, then wouldn't this universe be finished? How could they resist them? Meanwhile, a Qian suddenly asked, "Why was the Sword Sect able to resist them?" Xiao Dao fell silent for a short while before he said, "Because the sect master of the Sword Sect was very good at fighting. He killed at least 10 million Yin spirits on his own, and he made the entire spirit race stop on his own. Moreover, the patriarch of the spirit race at that time was even killed by a single swing of his sword." Her eyes rippled as she spoke and she seemed to be recalling the past. That battle was the first time the spirit race suffered. The spirit race left this universe obediently under that man's gaze, and they didn't even dare to let out a fart. However, that man isn't in this world anymore. Chapter 1133. The Green-Robed Man. Xian obviously knew the green-robed man, but he didn't know how strong he was. But he should be on the same level as the plain-dressed woman. And the green-robed man gave him a very strange feeling. That feeling was a bit like a relative, and to him this feeling was a bit absurd. Amu suddenly said, Why didn't he directly kill those nether spirits? Xian nodded and also asked, yes. He has that strength, right? Xiao Dao said with a smile. He does have that strength, but at that time the nether spirits chose to retreat and didn't fight to the death with him. They retreated to the nether spirit world, and that nether spirit world is very, very big. Apart from that, that place is very special and ordinary people can't enter at all because there's no spiritual qi, only endless death qi and yin qi. The space inside is also different from the space of the normal world. The space there is like a multidimensional universe and you'll get lost if you walk inside. It can be said that even shattering void tier elites can't come out after entering. Speaking up to here, she paused and then said, this is also the scary part about them. If they can't beat them, they can run and others can't chase them. Of course, since ancient times they almost have no natural enemies. Except for this sword sect. In fact, if it wasn't for the sword sect's sect leader heavily injuring them with his own strength, with the sword sect's strength, they could at most protect themselves and couldn't stop them. Qian suddenly asked, where did they come from? Xiao Dao looked at Qian and said with a smile, you asked a good question. I really did investigate them. This nether spirit isn't from this universe, nor from the higher realm, but from another place. Amu suddenly asked, what place? Be more detailed. Xiao Dao glanced at Amu and shook his head. You've also become a curious baby. Amu, Xiao Dao was silent for a moment and then said, fine. I'll tell you about this universe I know. In fact, this universe didn't have any 3, 4, or 5 dimensions. All living beings existed in one universe. However, everyone lives in different places. Hence, there is such a hierarchy in the universe. Xian suddenly asked, where did the universe come from? Xiao Dao looked at Xian. Xian hesitated for a moment before asking, there's also life. How was the first life formed? Also, why do the stars shine? Xiao Dao suddenly punched out. Boom. Xian was blasted hundreds of feet away. The moment he stopped, the space behind him cracked. The girls looked at Xian and shook their heads. Was this guy crazy? Asking such a question. However, they were actually a little curious and wanted to know. How did the universe come into being? How did life come into being? However, they wouldn't ask. In the distance, Xian rubbed his chest. The Xiao Dao was too violent. He hit people at the drop of a hat. Xiao Dao glanced at Xian. I haven't studied these questions you asked. The Prophet has. There might be an answer in the study. You can take a look for yourself when you open it in the future. Also, I really don't know everything. Do you understand? Xian smiled awkwardly. Understood. Xiao Dao was deep in thought. This chapter is not finished. Please turn the page. She took a deep breath and calmed down. Otherwise, she really wanted to kill this guy in front of her. Amu suddenly walked to Xiao Dao's side. She held Xiao Dao's hand and smiled. Miss Xiao Dao, don't be angry. Come, let's continue talking about this universe. Xiao Dao was silent for a moment before saying, strictly speaking, the upper realm is not the 6th dimension. It belongs to the boundary between the 6th dimension and the 5th dimension. However, they are related to the 6th dimension. This is because the first batch of people in the upper realm were driven out by the people of the 6th dimension. Amu frowned slightly. Driven out. Xiao Dao nodded. Qian suddenly asked, why? Xiao Dao said softly, this has to start from the system of the 6th dimension. The 6th dimension doesn't have the 5th dimension's tribulations. Why? Because they protect the 6th dimension's universe extremely well. In that universe, they strictly control the number of people who can cultivate. The population there is less than 1/10,000,000th of the population here. In addition, not everyone can cultivate there. Only those with great talent or perseverance can cultivate there. Those without talent and are unwilling to work hard will live for 60 to 70 years at most before dying. And because they can't cultivate, they can't destroy the spiritual energy there, so they can't cause any substantial damage to that universe. Hearing this, the expressions of the people in the room changed. Could it be like this? The mutated beast scripture suddenly asked. No one resisted? Xiao Dao looked at the mutated beast scripture. How? The strongest group of people joined forces to establish an orderly system. How could the people below resist? How could they resist? As for those who have the ability to resist, they would choose to join them to maintain that orderly system. Because that was the only way their universe could last forever. Besides that, they have all sorts of measures to protect the universe. For example, there's a power called the Union Hall. The Union Hall was jointly established by various top powers, and it's filled with extraordinary experts, the extremely strong kind. They're restricted by the various powers, but they don't listen to the orders of any single power. Their duty is to protect that universe. As she spoke, she paused for a moment and said, "In that universe, the experts of the Union Hall patrol everywhere. Besides cultivating, they don't allow anyone to steal the spiritual energy of the heavens and the earth on a large scale, let alone destroy the heavens and the earth. If you want to fight, you can. They have special battlefields there. So long as experts have attained a certain strength, they must enter those battlefields. Otherwise, once they're discovered, the Union Hall has the right to kill first and report later. The Union Hall is divided into the Martial Arts Hall and the Martial Arts Hall. The Martial Arts Hall is in charge of enforcing the law, and the Martial Arts Hall is in charge of repairing and balancing." Amu frowned slightly. "Repairing and balancing? What do you mean?" Xiao Dao said softly, "Those people from the One Palace are really scary. They're all scholars. They might not be very strong, but they're really knowledgeable. At first, I thought that the prophet wasn't from the One Palace. But after thinking about it, I don't think so." Yixian asked, "Why?" Xiao Dao said in a low voice, "The prophet is at least 10 times scarier than the people from the One Palace." Yixian still wanted to ask something, but Xiao Dao suddenly said, "Let's get back to the main topic. Let's talk about the One Palace. Their duty is to repair and balance. This repair is when some places become thin due to some natural reasons, they will repair it. Apart from that, they also have all sorts of array masters. These array masters have set up a lot of array formations to protect the spiritual energy in that universe. These array formations will protect the spiritual energy very well. For example, the spiritual energy in Shaman City can only be used for 10 years under normal circumstances. However, with those array formations in control Shaman City, this chapter is not over, please continue. The spiritual energy here can be used for at least 50 years. Hearing this, the expressions of Yixian and the others changed. Xiao Dao continued, "There's one more thing. They have a very strict law. No one is allowed to harm the spirits of the world. If anyone dares to harm the spirits of the world, they will receive an extremely cruel punishment. In the end, they will be thrown into bright prison and suffer the pain of being burned by the flames of karma for all eternity." Amu said in a low voice, "Is the status of the spirits that high there?" Xiao Dao nodded. "Very, very high, terrifyingly high. This is because the spirits of the world can naturally form spiritual energy and nourish the world. It can be said that without those spirits of the world, it's impossible for them to maintain the balance of the spiritual energy for a long time." As she spoke, she looked at Yixian. "If that little white fellow goes to that place, she will be worshipped like a god. Based on what I know, even in the 6th dimension, there isn't a single spirit ancestor. And the 6th dimension is also doing everything it can to find a spirit ancestor. The use of a spirit ancestor is simply unimaginable, especially that little fellow. That little fellow is no longer a normal spirit ancestor. She has mutated, and her ability has never appeared even in the place I come from. Of course, it's best if the 6th dimension doesn't have any ideas about her. The people around that little fellow can defeat the 6th dimension." Yixian suddenly asked, "Miss Amu, did you say the place you come from? Where did you come from?" In the field, all the girls looked at little Daoist. They were also very curious about Xiao Dao's background. Xiao Dao said flatly, "I come from another ancient place." Yixian blinked. "What ancient place?" Xiao Dao looked at Yixian. "Why are you asking so many questions? Does where I come from have anything to do with you?" Yixian, seeing that Xiao Dao was slightly agitated, Amu suddenly said, Come, let's talk about the 6th dimension, talk about the 6th dimension." Xiao Dao pondered for a moment and then said, "The 6th dimension attaches great importance to the protection of that world. Especially the Union Hall. This power is very tolerant because there aren't only humans there are also other living beings. For example, some demon spirits can enter. Of course, the prerequisite is that you have strength and ability. As long as you have strength and ability, they will welcome you to join." Amu said softly, "In that case, the 6th dimension's universe is much better than ours?" Xiao Dao said softly, "It's not much better. It's just that this place can't be compared to their place. Compared to that place, this place is like a barbarian land. A Qian suddenly said, Miss Xiao Dao, just now you said that the people of the upper realm were chased down by the people of the sixth dimension? Xiao Dao nodded. Yes. A Qian was a little puzzled. Why? Xiao Dao smiled. Where there are people, there are benefits, and where there are benefits, there are conflicts. The sixth dimension is not really harmonious, there are also internal problems. Back then, there were serious internal problems. There were two forces that had serious differences, and in the end, the two forces directly fought. That time it was really too much for the sixth dimension. Because there were some differences within the Union Hall. Both sides fought, and in the end, the losing group was forced to leave the sixth dimension and came to the lower realm to linger on. P.S. You can do hair at the healthcare center. Why don't you believe it? Also, healthcare center is just a simple massage. Do you have any misunderstandings about this industry? End of this chapter. Chapter 1134. At this moment, everyone in the field suddenly understood. Zhou Xian finally understood the ins and outs of the matter. His enemy was not the entire sixth dimension but the upper realm. Amu suddenly asked, their target is the bookstore, right? Xiao Dao nodded, yes. And the place where this bookstore once appeared was in the sixth dimension. Amu asked again, is the prophet from the sixth dimension? Xiao Dao spread her hands, I'm not sure about that. When this bookstore first appeared in the sixth dimension I was already here. And I didn't investigate it. Amu was silent. Zhou Xian suddenly asked, Miss Xiao Dao, in your opinion what exactly is in this bookstore? Xiao Dao was silent for a moment then said, the upper realm is so desperate to snatch this thing. The thing in this thing must be very important to them. And if it's important to them, it might also be important to the sixth dimension. Hearing this, Zhou Xian's face darkened. In that case, the sixth dimension might also become his enemy? Xiao Dao suddenly said, of course your priority now is to deal with the upper realm. In order to deal with you, these guys did not hesitate to join forces with those Yin spirits. You really have to be careful. Amu said in a deep voice, Miss Xiao Dao, where did these Yin spirits come from? Xiao Dao was silent for a moment then said, they were also driven out. Zhou Xian and the others. Xiao Dao said softly, they came from a very very far place, even farther than the sixth dimension. Wherever they go they are like locusts, really barren. And their cultivation method is even more peculiar. They don't need spiritual energy because they rely on devouring, their growth is devouring, and it is precisely because of this that they are terrifying. They can devour other people's cultivation for their own use. If it wasn't for the sword sect stopping them, this universe would have been gone. Zhou Xian suddenly said, does Tendo know? Xiao Dao nodded, yes. This was also the reason why she had asked the plain-dressed woman to stay back then. She knew that the woman in the plain dress was feared by both the upper realm and the Yin spirits in this universe. But once she leaves, those fellows won't have any worries anymore. A woman in a plain dress. Zhou Xian looked up. He had no idea where she was at the moment. Little Taoist continued, actually you and the heavenly Tao have the same goal now. This is also why she has helped you so many times. Can be said that she is helping you and using you at the same time. Zhou Xian said in a low voice, can I also make use of her? Xiao Dao looked at Zhou Xian. As long as you have the ability you can definitely do it. She's not someone who can't afford to play. Zhou Xian nodded. Understood. A Qian suddenly said, can we go to the sixth dimension? Everyone looked at a Qian and a Qian hesitated for a moment before he said, I think that place is better. Xiao Dao said softly, it's indeed better. But it's impossible for all of you to go there. No, it should be said that they won't allow all of you to go there. Because all of you won't abide by the rules there. For example, your Tian clan. If all of you go there, then the cultivations of countless clansmen of your Tian clan will be crippled, and they won't be able to cultivate anymore. They can only die of old age. Let me ask you, would they be willing to do that? A Qian fell silent. Giving up on their cultivation and being unable to cultivate was even more painful than killing them. Xiao Dao said softly, this is your home. Don't think about destroying it and looking for a new home. Perhaps there will be a new home, a better home, but it might be someone else's home as well. Instead of that, why don't you protect what you have now? Ah Qian said softly, Miss Little Taoist is right. It's just that to change is so difficult. Xiao Dao smiled. Now do you know how difficult it is to be a prophet? It's because he wants to change. Trying to prove it is as difficult as ascending to the heavens. This is not something that can be changed with just strength. For example, if you want to change, all the cultivators in the fifth dimension will be your enemies and will oppose you. Amu suddenly said, then how did the sixth dimension do it? Xiao Dao looked at Amu and said, blood. The blood of countless eras has flowed. Moreover, they have an extremely powerful guide, and this guide established this order on the corpses of countless ancestors. After saying that, she paused and then said, to be more accurate, it was two people from different eras. One person created a small spark and ignited a light of hope, while the other ignited it and turned it into a prairie fire. Their method won't work here, at least not now. Zhou Xian nodded his head. He also felt that it was unrealistic. Change? Who was willing to give up their cultivation? Who was willing to stop cultivating and become an ordinary person, growing old and dying? No one was willing. Could be said that if they wanted to do so, it would be equivalent to becoming enemies with all the cultivators in the fifth dimension. At this moment, Xiao Dao suddenly turned her head to look at the horizon. Her gaze pierced through the starry sky, and after a moment she said softly, Arrow is about to break through. The first shattering void tier elite of the Cambrian era? Arrow was about to break through. Hearing this, everyone was stunned, and soon, everyone disappeared on the spot. Heading to the Great Desolation Country. Arrow breaking through, that was a big deal. In the field, Xiao Dao raised her head to look at the horizon, a trace of worry in her eyes. Arrow breaking through. If the higher realms didn't stop Arrow, then Arrow would really reach the shattering void tier. For someone like Arrow to reach the shattering void tier, that wasn't an ordinary shattering void tier. Could be said that once Arrow reached the shattering void tier, at present in the entire fifth dimension only Tendo could beat her. She couldn't beat him, because her current strength hadn't recovered, and in the current situation she couldn't beat Arrow, who reached the shattering void tier. Only Tendo could. After the woman in the plain dress left, at present the best fighter in the entire fifth dimension was Tendo. And how strong Tendo was and to what extent no one knew. It had always been a mystery. Xiao Dao withdrew her thoughts and turned to look at the horizon. Arrow. A super swordsman of the shattering void tier, that battle prowess even in the higher realms, couldn't be said to be invincible, but it was still invincible. Would the higher realms really let Arrow break through smoothly? In the field, Xiao Dao was silent for a long time and then turned to leave. In a certain part of the starry sky, a woman was slowly walking. In her hand she was holding a small roasted fish. This woman was Tendo. At this moment Tendo suddenly stopped and turned to look. After a moment she smiled slightly. About to break through? After saying that, she shook her head and turned to leave. She walked sloppily, swinging the small fish in her hand. She didn't look like Tendo at all, but more like a problem girl. In a short while the woman disappeared at the end of the galaxy. Great Desolate Country. After Zhou Xian and the others arrived at the Great Desolate Country, the king of the Great Desolate Country instantly breathed a sigh of relief. Arrow's breakthrough had reached a critical moment, and if someone came to disturb him at this moment, the Great Desolate Country couldn't stop them at all. Fortunately, Zhou Xian had come with some strong people. Zhou Xian looked at Xiao Dao, who wasn't far away. How much longer? Xiao Dao glanced at Arrow's direction and said softly, 3 days at most. 3 days. Zhou Xian looked up at the horizon. 3 days? Would the people of the higher realms give 3 days? No. They definitely wouldn't give Arrow these 3 days. Zhou Xian opened his palm, and a voice transmission talisman suddenly disappeared. No matter what, he had to be fully prepared. Somewhere in the void, an illusory old man looked down. His gaze pierced through the galaxy and directly saw the Great Desolate Country. His gaze was always on the area where Arrow was. He had already sensed an extremely powerful sword aura. Arrow. The people of the higher realms knew about this woman swordsman. Currently, Arrow was only at the ruler realm, but his strength had already reached an extremely terrifying level. If he broke through again. Thinking of this, the old man's brows deeply wrinkled. No matter what, he couldn't let Arrow break through. At this moment, a middle-aged man suddenly appeared beside him. This person was the Lord of the Dark World. The old man glanced at the Lord and the Lord looked down. What's the plan? The old man chuckled. Naturally, we can't let her break through. Once this woman breaks through, it will be extremely disadvantageous to us. The Lord pointed downwards. That little Taoist is there too. She alone can fend off countless experts. The old man softly said, That depends on what kind of expert it is. The Lord suddenly said, "My dark world can't stop her." Now that he had learned his lesson, he didn't want to be cannon fodder. The old man smiled, "Just watch." The Lord deeply looked at the old man but didn't say anything. In the great desolate country, the aura in the area where Era was getting stronger and stronger. That aura was also mixed with sword aura. At this moment all the experts of the great desolate country were looking over here. Era was about to break through. Era was the pride of the great desolate country, and the pride of the entire Cambrian era. Just like this, time passed bit by bit. About 2 days later, the aura in the area where Era was getting stronger and stronger. That aura spread towards the sky, causing the entire galaxy to tremble. At this moment, Amu suddenly walked to the side of Zhou Xian, looked up at the sky and softly said, "The fifth dimension tribulation is coming." Zhou Xian chuckled, "Don't be afraid. If you really can't hold on, I will put you in the tower. We will hide in the tower. This tower is hard enough. It can definitely block the fifth dimension tribulation." Amu blinked. "Can I?" Zhou Xian nodded, "Yes." Amu shook her head. "I still have my clansmen. I have to stay with them." "Clansmen?" Zhou Xian was silent. His Xiaota couldn't carry so many people. Zhou Xian turned his head to look at the sky. Speaking of Xiaota, he suddenly thought of Lian Qian and Xianxia. These two said they went out to look for Dao Law, but now there was no news at all. They couldn't be lost, right? At this moment, an old man suddenly appeared in the sky above the great desolate country. Zhou Xian collected his thoughts and looked up at the old man. The old man looked at Zhou Xian and smiled. "Give us the universal library and we will leave. We will not disturb your world, we will keep our word." Zhou Xian opened his palm, and the universal library suddenly appeared in front of the old man. Zhou Xian said with a smile, "Take it. I don't want it anymore." Everyone. At the side, Xiao Dao glanced at Zhou Xian. She knew that this guy was definitely playing some dirty trick. Chapter 1135. Does Zhou Xian look like someone who would suffer a loss? Doesn't seem like it. Xiao Dao looks at Zhou Xian curiously. What is this guy planning? In the sky, the old man is stunned when he sees the book room. This is different from the script he had in mind. This doesn't seem real. The old man doesn't take the book room. Instead he looks at Zhou Xian. Zhou Xian blinks and says, "You don't want it?" The old man stares at Zhou Xian. "What are you playing at?" Zhou Xian shakes his head. "What do you want? Didn't you ask me to hand it over? Now that I hand it over, you ask me what I'm playing at. If I don't hand it over, you want to hit me. I'm really in a difficult situation." The old man looks at Zhou Xian. He doesn't take the book room. Even if you use your toes to think, you can tell that this is strange. At this moment, the Lord suddenly appears by the old man's side. He looks at the old man and says, "Since he handed it over, why don't we take it?" With that he puts the book room away. However, he's still very vigilant. Obviously he's afraid that Zhou Xian is playing tricks. However, Zhou Xian doesn't play any tricks. After the Lord puts the book room away, he looks at Zhou Xian after confirming that there are no accidents. There's also that Xiao Ta. Zhou Xian smiles and points with his finger. The prison pagoda flies in front of the Lord. The Lord squints his eyes and puts the prison pagoda away. There are still no accidents. The Lord stares at Zhou Xian. Zhou Xian smiles. "I gave it to you." The Lord suddenly turns to look at the old man. "Attack." The old man squints his eyes and doesn't answer. The Lord says coldly, "This person is so talented. Aren't you afraid? There's also that arrow. Once this woman breaks through, do you still have the confidence to kill her? Even if you do, how much will it cost?" The old man is silent and hesitant. Zhou Xian. Arrow. These two people could pose a great threat to them, especially Arrow. Once this woman broke through, her threat would be extraordinary. Thinking of this, the old man's eyes were filled with killing intent. At this moment the Lord said, Zhou Xian took the initiative to hand over Xiao Ta and the bookstore. He is showing weakness. He wants to buy time for Arrow. His goal is to let Arrow break through smoothly. As he spoke, he paused for a moment before he continued. "If we don't eliminate the roots, the weeds will grow again with the spring breeze." The old man looked at Zhou Xian and said with a smile, "I think what he said makes sense." Zhou Xian smiled and said, "I also think that what he said makes sense." The old man looked at Zhou Xian. "Then I might have to break my promise." Zhou Xian blinked. "Sure. As soon as he spoke, the prison pagoda in the Lord's hand shook violently. A moment later, a sword flew out from within. The executing heaven sword. Because the prison pagoda was in the Lord's hand, the moment the sword appeared, it was already at the center of the Lord's forehead. However, the sword ancestor's reaction was extremely fast. The moment the sword touched his forehead, his body became illusory and he wanted to dodge. However, at this moment, a mysterious force suddenly enveloped him. Sword domain. The moment the sword domain enveloped the Lord, he was immediately suppressed. His body stopped for a moment, and it was this moment that allowed the executing heaven sword to pierce through his forehead. The sword tore through the sky, and a ray of sword light remained in the Lord's head. Bang! The Lord's body collapsed, but his soul had already escaped. However, at this moment another sword flew out from the prison pagoda. The soul-suppressing sword. The Lord's pupils constricted when he saw the soul-suppressing sword. He knew that he was done for. The soul-suppressing sword pierced into the Lord's body. Bang! A powerful wave of soul energy suddenly surged out from the soul-suppressing sword, and the surrounding space trembled. It was like an earthquake and it was incomparably terrifying. At this time Xian opened his palm and the prison pagoda and the book house returned to his hand. Xian looked at the elder. The elder hadn't made a move since the beginning, nor could he. This was because Xian had killed the Lord in the blink of an eye. Of course, Xian knew very well that the main reason he was able to kill the Lord was because the Lord himself had been injured. After the Lord had been severely injured by Xiao Dao, his injuries hadn't healed at all because the time was too short. Besides that, the Lord had the prison pagoda, but the Lord didn't know that the prison pagoda could cooperate with him. Careless. In the end, the Lord was too careless. In the sky, the elder looked down at Xian with an expressionless face. His expression was calm as if he had expected this a long time ago. They had already investigated Xian carefully, and the Lord had always been extremely wary of Xian. This was also why he did not go and fetch Xiao Ta in the book house earlier. The Lord had also been wary, but he had underestimated Xian. Xian looked at the old man and the old man smiled faintly. I heard that Xian values friendship. Xian looked at the old man. Are you going to threaten me with something now? The old man smiled and said, I've made some calculations. My people should have reached Shaman City by now. Xian smiled. The old man narrowed his eyes slightly. Xian looked at the old man. I wish them good luck. The old man lifted his head and looked at the sky. His gaze pierced through space and arrived at Shaman City. At that moment 12 black-robed people had appeared in the sky above Shaman City at some point of time, and there were 19 people standing before them. The ones leading the group were Tai Yi and Shen Gong. All of them were rulers. In this universe, besides monsters like Xiao Dao, Arrow and Tendo, there was no one who could instantly kill these 19 righteous gods. Of course, they had to get rid of the unique aspect of the sword sect. Tai Yi looked at the 12 black-robed people before him and said flatly, kill them. The moment he finished speaking, the 19 people charged forward. The 12 people did not retreat. They charged straight at Tai Yi and the others. Wuxia looked at the sky from below Shaman City, and by his side was Hao Tian. The Celestials had already moved to Shaman City. This was Xian's idea. This way they would not be defeated one by one. At that moment Wuxia suddenly said, I didn't expect that we would work together. Hao Tian said softly, for survival. If the Wu clan and the Celestials still wanted to fight against each other, then the only thing that would await them would be destruction. At that moment both of them felt very lucky. Because they had a god tier and a great priestess. Without these two people, it would be extremely difficult for the Celestials and the Wu clan to work together. In the sky above the kingdom of Great Wilderness, the old man withdrew his gaze and looked at Xian. From what I know, there are a lot of people who care about this. Xian smiled. Are you talking about Fu Wenzong and the Worldwide Academy? The old man narrowed his eyes and turned his head to look. In the sky above Fu Wenzong. In the sky above Fu Wenzong there were 5 black-robed people. But facing these 5 black-robed people were 5 righteous gods. They were all from Zhou Sacred Mountain. 5 against 5. All of them were peak ruler realm powerhouses and none of them could do anything to the other. In the sky above the Worldwide Academy, there were 13 black-robed people. They were all peak ruler realm powerhouses. The reason why there were more of them than Fu Wenzong was because Zhang Wenxiu had a special relationship with Yi Xian. Their target was Zhang Wenxiu. But in the sky above Fu Wenzong, besides the 5 righteous gods, there was also the Sword Sect's Elder Gu and a true dragon. There was also a gigantic 8 trigrams rune in the sky above the Worldwide Academy. This rune was activated by all the people in the Worldwide Academy, so they did not have to worry about the rune running out of energy. At least they did not have to worry about it for the time being. But now, regardless of whether it was Fu Wenzong, the Worldwide Academy, or Shaman City, they only needed to drag it out. Drag it out until Arrow broke through. Once Arrow broke through, all their problems would be solved. In the sky above Shaman City, the black-robed old man's face suddenly turned dark. He did not expect that Yi Xian would be prepared for this. Below, Yi Xian smiled. He was not in a hurry. What he needed to do now was to wait for Arrow to break through. Arrow was in a critical period right now, and he could not afford to make any mistakes. Yi Xian turned his head around and cast a glance into the distance. Xiao Dao was standing in the distance. She had been standing by Arrow's side all this while. With her around, even if the Tendo attacked, it would be impossible for him to disturb Arrow for a short period of time. Based on the current situation, their situation was very stable. Yi Xian also felt that their situation was very stable. That was why he was very calm. In the sky, the black-robed old man suddenly fell silent. He did not retreat and neither did he attack. It was as if he was waiting for something. When he saw this, Yi Xian frowned. His instincts told him that things were not as simple as they seemed. What was the old man waiting for? At that moment, a woman suddenly walked over from the distance. She was dressed in a white dress that was as white as snow. There was not a speck of dust on it, and in her left hand she held a small fish that had been half-eaten. All the people in the area looked at the woman who walked over. Tendo. The black-robed old man's calm expression suddenly became solemn when he saw the woman, and it grew even more solemn. He stared fixedly at Tendo while clenching his fists as if he was fearful of something. Yi Xian looked at Tendo and blinked. What's this woman doing here? Suddenly, the black-robed old man spoke in a low voice. Didn't you say that you wouldn't interfere? Tendo smiled. I just came to have a look. I don't have any plans. Suddenly, Yi Xian appeared in front of Tendo. He grabbed Tendo's hand and spoke excitedly, You're finally here. Everyone was speechless. A Qian looked at Amu. Are they very familiar with each other? Amu blinked. Perhaps. A Qian was speechless. In the sky, Tendo looked at Yi Xian and blinked. We are very familiar with each other. Before she could finish speaking, Yi Xian suddenly snatched the small fish from her hand. He chewed on it and then gave Tendo a thumbs up. Delicious. It's much better than the last time you made it for me. Your cooking skills have improved a lot. Everyone was speechless. In the distance, the black-robed old man's face was gloomy and scary. These two have such a good relationship. In front of Yi Xian, Tendo looked at Yi Xian and blinked her eyes. Yi Xian suddenly said seriously, Don't worry, I Yi Xian am here. As he spoke, he turned and pointed at the black-robed old man. I swear, as long as I still have a breath left in me, these people can forget about destroying our 5th dimension. I will use my life to guard the 5th dimension together. Whoever wants to harm, whoever wants to destroy the 5th dimension, must step over my Yi Xian's dead body. As soon as he finished speaking, his body suddenly trembled violently. Then tiny red runes that could be seen with the naked eye suddenly appeared on top of Yi Xian's head and then entered Yi Xian's body one by one. Yi Xian was stunned. This was different from the oath he made in the past. In the distance, Xiao Dao's face was terrifyingly gloomy. He swore to Tendo. Is this guy crazy? Feeling those tiny runes enter his body, Yi Xian suddenly panicked. He looked at the sky and hesitated for a moment, then said, Can't I just pretend that I didn't make an oath? Tendo blinked her eyes. It's too late. The karma has been formed, fate has been decided. Yi Xian was speechless. P.S. The monthly votes are so few. Did I do something wrong? Chapter 1136. Both. It must be said that at this moment Yi Xian was really panicking. Because he felt that the oath he made was different from before. In the distance, Xiao Dao looked at Yi Xian and shook his head. Swearing to Tendo. Under normal circumstances, swearing to an ordinary person was useless, as it would not form karma. However, Yixian was different. He was not an ordinary person. Moreover, he did not have the ability to cut off his own karma. Of course, the most important thing was that the person he swore to was Tendo. Tendo. This represented the karma of the entire fifth dimension. Yixian swore to her. Just as Tendo said, the karma was formed and his fate was set. What karma? The karma of Yixian and the fifth dimension. What fate? The fate of Yixian and Tendo. Thinking of this, Xiao Dao shook his head again. Really a pig brain. In front of Yixian, Tendo sincerely said, "Thank you very much, I represent the billions of creatures in the fifth dimension to thank you." Yixian smiled. "We are on the same side, why are you being so polite?" Then he turned to look at the black-robed old man. "If you have any dirty tricks, use them all." After saying that, he retreated to the side of Tendo. In the distance, the black-robed old man looked at Tendo. "Didn't you say that you would not care about anything?" Tendo blinked. "I really did not care about anything." The black-robed old man stared at Tendo. "You are with him." Tendo was about to speak, but Yixian suddenly pulled out his sword and pointed it at the black-robed old man. "What nonsense are you talking about? If you don't want to fight, then quickly scram. I am telling you, I represent the billions of creatures in the fifth dimension to tell you that we do not welcome you. I will give you 3 days. If you do not scram from the fifth dimension, then I will not be polite." The black-robed old man looked at Yixian. "You are so arrogant." Yixian laughed. "Do you think we're joking with you?" As he spoke, he looked at Tendo. "Do I make sense?" Tendo gently bit the grilled fish in his hand and said, "Makes sense." Yixian nodded, then looked at the black-robed old man. "Why aren't you attacking?" Was he worried about the Tendo? "Don't worry, she won't make a move. He was just watching from the side. I'll fight you. Yixian will beat all of you up." Tendo looked at Yixian. "I won't make a move." Yixian nodded. "Don't make a move. I'll go first. We'll talk about it if I can't beat them." Tendo blinked. She still wanted to say something, but Yixian had already rushed towards the black-robed elder in the distance. A ray of sword light tore through the battlefield. However, Yixian's sword missed because the black-robed elder had already retreated hundreds of feet. He did not make a move. In fact, the one the higher-ups were afraid of was not Yixian arrow or Xiao Dao. It was the Tendo in front of them. Tendo. How strong was this woman? No one knew. If she intervened, they would have no chance of winning, because their people did not come down. Relying on the experts that they had cultivated and gathered in this cosmos, it was impossible to fight against Tendo and the others. It was not enough. Moreover, there was still Xiao Dao and Arrow who was about to break through. If these 3 women joined hands, they would be invincible in the fifth dimension. The black-robed old man looked up at the sky. Should he make a move or not? He naturally had a trump card. However, because of the addition of the Tendo, his trump card seemed powerless. He knew that even if he used all his trump cards, it was still impossible to kill the woman in front of him. Right at this moment, ripples suddenly appeared in the space in front of him. After a short moment, the black-robed old man took a deep look at the Tendo and Yixian, and then he turned around and left. Seeing this, Yixian was about to chase after him. Next to him, Tiandao suddenly laughed and said, "The person behind him can kill you." Yixian hurriedly stopped and then he turned around to look at the Tendo. "Is he really that strong?" The Tendo laughed and said, "You can't kill him. It's more important to wait for Arrow to break through." Yixian looked at the Tendo. "You're not angry?" The Tendo laughed. "Are you talking about how you used me?" Yixian nodded. The Tendo shook his head and chuckled. "What's there to be angry about? Wasn't I using you as well?" Yixian chuckled. "You have a good attitude." The Tendo looked at Yixian. "Can I have a look at your study?" Yixian laughed. "Of course." After that, he flicked his finger and the study landed in front of the Tendo. The Tendo looked at the study in her hand and then she returned the study to Yixian. Yixian looked at the Tendo. "Do you know what's inside?" The Tendo laughed. "The things above." Yixian still wanted to ask something, but the Tendo suddenly said, "There is a barrier between the upper realm and us. The barrier is formed naturally by the laws of the universe. It is indestructible and they don't have the ability to destroy it. But," saying that, she smiled. "They are trying to sneak down." Yixian frowned. "Sneak down? Can I?" The Tendo laughed. "Of course you can." At this time, Xiao Dao suddenly appeared beside the Tendo. She looked at the Tendo. What do you mean by sneak down? The Tendo chuckled. The spirit tribe. Hearing this, Xiao Dao's expression changed. The spirit tribe. Yi Xian looked at Xiao Dao. The universal barrier is useless against the spirit tribe? The Xiao Dao nodded. It's useless, because they can even swallow the universal barrier. Hearing this, Yi Xian's pupils shrank. So abnormal? The Xiao Dao said. They are more than abnormal. They are very, very abnormal. If they go to the sixth dimension may not be able to stop them. The Tendo said softly. It's a 40-60 chance. Little Taoist looked at Heaven's Will. Heaven's Will smiled and said, the sixth dimension of Yin spirits. If it was in the past, the sixth dimension would have been crushed because that was when the Yin spirits were at their strongest. At that time they were invincible and unstoppable. If it wasn't for swordsmen, the spirit tribe would have dominated the fifth dimension and the sixth dimension. Yi Xian asked. What about the sword sect? The Xiao Dao said softly. They didn't confront the sword sect head-on. It's not difficult for them to use some special methods to help the people from the upper realm come down. Yi Xian asked again. Is there a big difference in strength between us and the upper realm? The Xiao Dao smiled. You can ask the Tendo. Yi Xian looked at Heavenly Dao and Heavenly Dao said softly, there's still quite a bit of difference. Of course, it's not as if we don't have the power to fight back. However, if they borrow the nether spirits, what you have to worry about is whether the sword sect can completely fend off the nether spirits. The worst case scenario is that the sword sect will be held back by the nether spirits, and they will send some people to help the upper realm to deal with you. If that's the case, then you're finished. Yi Xian blinked. Isn't it us? Think about it. If the spirit tribe enters the fifth dimension, won't the fifth dimension disappear? The Tendo nodded. Indeed. Yi Xian said seriously. So, we have a common enemy. The Tendo smiled. They will only attack you. They won't attack me. The Yi Xian said in a deep voice. What happens after they attack me? Won't you be the only one left? The Tendo smiled mischievously. They won't kill you. After saying that, she turned around and left. Yi Xian, the Xiao Dao looked at the Tendo and said softly, you shouldn't have made that oath to her. Yi Xian said in a deep voice, Xiao Dao, what will happen if I break that oath? The Xiao Dao shook his head. I don't know, but it's definitely not a good thing. Yi Xian was silent. The Xiao Dao said again, actually it's not entirely a bad thing. Yi Xian looked at the Xiao Dao. The Xiao Dao smiled. Cause and effect. That's the cause and effect between you and her. Didn't you notice it? That is, although she didn't help you, she has always been on your side. Just like just now, if it wasn't for her appearance, we would have been in a tough battle. She is on your side now, or should I say she has always been on your side. That's because you're not a threat to this universe, but the people above us are. Yi Xian smiled and said, Little Taoist, I don't understand. Why is he able to call out so many sovereign realm experts? Are sovereign realm experts everywhere like dogs? The Xiao Dao smiled. Think about it in a different way. Can be said that half of the ruler realm experts in this universe are with him, and the other half are with you. In other words, you're righteous gods. This universe has only had 50 to 60 ruler realm experts for so many years. Is that a lot? 50 to 60. Yi Xian chuckled. That's not a lot. The Xiao Dao nodded. Do you know why the Tendo is helping you? Yi Xian thought for a moment and said, because they aren't just plotting against my study room. They are plotting against this universe. The Xiao Dao smiled. Why do you say that? Yi Xian said softly, with so many ruler realm experts, it's impossible for them to submit in such a short time. There's only one explanation, and that is, those ruler realm experts have been colluding with them for a long time. The Xiao Dao nodded. Yes. In fact, if it weren't for you, those righteous gods might have followed them. If that's the case, then basically all the ruler realm experts in this universe are on his side. Yi Xian suddenly asked, can all of them work together to overthrow the Tendo? The Xiao Dao was silent for a moment and said, if it was a long, long time ago, 100 ruler realm experts and some shattering void tier elites could still pose a great threat to the Tendo. But now, as she spoke, she looked at Yi Xian. Originally, the Tendo wouldn't fight. She's very kind, just like the little white guy. Unfortunately, she wasn't as lucky as the little white guy to meet someone like the green-robed man. Yi Xian said in a low voice, She started to cultivate later? The Xiao Dao nodded. She started to learn later. She learned the martial arts of humans and learned the advantages of all living things. Can be said that she has a very, very thorough understanding of humans and all living things. Her talent in cultivation can only be described as terrifying. At this point she paused and then said, "Can you feel the aura of sword Dao on her?" The Yi Xian was stunned. "She's also a swordsman?" The Xiao Dao nodded. "Moreover, she's a very powerful swordsman." Yi Xian suddenly asked, "Who's more powerful than the plain-dressed woman?" The Xiao Dao suddenly punched Yi Xian's face. Chapter 1137. Bang. Yi Xian was directly sent flying, and this time he flew as far as 1,000 feet. As soon as he stopped, a mouthful of blood essence sprayed from his mouth. All the women were speechless. Xiao Dao shook his head. "I really couldn't restrain myself." At this moment Yi Xian was quite stunned as well. That Xiao Dao was too ruthless. "Didn't I just ask a question? She's really too violent. I'll never be able to get married in the future." Suddenly the space above them split apart, and then a middle-aged man walked out from within it. The middle-aged man wore a black robe and held a folding fan in his right hand. Moreover, an old man was following behind him. It was the black-clothed old man who'd left earlier. "He's here again." Yi Xian's brows knit together slightly. These fellows really don't know when to stop. Who's this fellow? Is he from this world? Or the Ascension Dimension? Yi Xian turned around to gaze at Xiao Dao. Xiao Dao glanced at the black-robed man. "He's from the Ascension Dimension. They can descend here. They can descend here." Yi Xian gazed at the black-robed man. Since he was able to descend here, then it meant that he joined forces with the spirit of Yin. The spirit of Yin. Yi Xian restrained his thoughts and gazed at Xiao Dao. "Protect arrow." Xiao Dao nodded slightly. Suddenly, the middle-aged man smiled. "Don't worry, I won't take advantage of them." As he spoke, he glanced at Arrow and smiled. "I'll wait for her to break through and then I'll fight her." All the others gazed at the black-robed man when they heard this. Arrogance? Or confidence? The black-robed man suddenly gazed at Xiao Dao and then he grinned. "Miss Xiao Dao, we're very curious about you. Because according to our investigations, you don't seem to be from the 6th dimension." Xiao Dao spoke indifferently. "It's pointless to investigate me." The black-robed man shook his head. "No, it's very meaningful. Currently there are 5 people who pose the greatest threat to us. The first is the woman in the plain dress who has already left. This person is able to break through the barrier of the universe and rush into the 6th dimension. With this kind of strength, there is no one in the upper realm who is his opponent." As he spoke, he paused for a moment before continuing. "The second one is the woman in the white robe. Her clone instantly killed a venerable envoy from the upper realm. With this kind of strength, if her original body was here, no one from the upper realm would be able to fight against her." Xiao Dao looked at the black-robed man. "Then why are you still here to kill him?" The black-robed man smiled and said, "I'll answer that question later, Miss Xiao Dao. The third person was none other than the heavenly Dao. We still don't know how strong this person is. Furthermore, this woman wants us to fight to the death with you in the upper realm. This is an open plot. Even though we know her plot, we can't do anything about it. Because the price of killing her was far too great. Moreover, he might not be able to kill it. And this fourth one." As he spoke, he looked at Xiao Dao. "This fourth one is you, Miss Xiao Dao. According to our investigation, Miss Xiao Dao seems to have suffered some kind of injury. Right now, Miss Xiao Dao's strength should be less than 20% of what it used to be. If Miss Xiao Dao's strength completely recovers, no one in the upper realm would be a match for Miss Xiao Dao." Yi Xian suddenly said, "Am I the 5th one?" Everyone. The black-robed old man behind the black-robed man glanced at Yi Xian, and the corners of his eyes twitched. "Damn it, why are people from the lower realm so thick-skinned?" The black-robed man looked at, "This chapter is not finished, please continue to the next page." Yi Xian smiled and said, "You're not the 5th one. However, the 5 people who pose the greatest threat to us are all related to you. So, we were hesitating about whether we should continue to fight for this study room." Yi Xian smiled and said, "It's obvious that you've decided to fight for it." The black-robed man nodded and said, "We have no other choice. Let's talk about the 5th one first. This 5th one is the Sword Sect. Fortunately, they're being held back by the Dark Yin tribe and can't come here for the time being. Otherwise we wouldn't even dare to come down. Xiao Dao suddenly said softly, actually there are a few more. The black-robed man looked at Xiao Dao and said, Miss Xiao Dao, please tell us. Xiao Dao shook her head and said, since you've chosen to be his enemy, you won't care about this. As she spoke, she looked at the black-robed man and said, I'm very curious. Why do you insist on that study room? The black-robed man said softly, Miss Xiao Dao, how much do you know about the prophet? Xiao Dao shook her head and said, not much. The black-robed man nodded and said, the first place he stayed was in the upper realm. Of course he was just passing by. Xiao Dao frowned and said, what did he do there? The black-robed man said softly, he did us a great favor. If it wasn't for his help, we wouldn't have been able to resist the sixth dimension. Xiao Dao stared at the black-robed man and said, then why did you still kill him? The black-robed man looked at Zhou Xian and said with a smile, to be precise, we only wanted that Xiao Ta and the study room. However, we knew that he wouldn't take the initiative to hand it over. As for why we did this and why we targeted him even though we knew that he had countless backers. As he spoke, he looked at Xiao Dao and said, survival. Xiao Dao frowned and said, you can't survive in the upper realm? The black-robed man said softly, we've been fighting against the sixth dimension all these years. However, we still can't enter the sixth dimension. If we don't enter the sixth dimension, even we have to face the fifth dimension tribulation. Zhou Xian suddenly asked, why were you driven down? The black-robed man looked at Zhou Xian and said with a smile, because we wanted to change the model above. Zhou Xian frowned and said, isn't that model quite good? The black-robed man shook his head and said, that model indeed protects that part of the universe. However, have you thought about those people at the bottom? Many people are destined from birth. They can't cultivate and can't enjoy spiritual energy. They can only be ordinary people. Can be said that from birth their lives are destined. They can't cultivate. However, others can cultivate. The people of the Union Palace and the super forces can cultivate. Moreover, their people can obtain good cultivation resources from birth. As he spoke, he smiled and said, the cultivation resources and qualifications in the sixth dimension are in the hands of the top forces. They are all people, but birth decides everything. Hard work. Talent. Honestly, some people struggle their whole lives to pursue something while some people get it the moment they are born. Do you think it's fair? Xiao Dao shook his head and said, since you're talking about birth, then I have to say a few more words. Birth is not something we can decide, but our life is something we can decide. Bad birth. Why don't you fight for it? If you're not born well and you're not willing to fight for it, then you're really done for. Moreover, forgive me for speaking bluntly. Since ancient times, many super experts were not born well at all. As she spoke, she looked at the black-robed man and said, although the system in the sixth dimension is unfair to many people, without it, the sixth dimension would have already been destroyed and the spiritual energy would have become sparse. It would have been on the verge of extinction. Of course, for the people below. If this chapter is not finished, please continue. For those people, it is indeed unfair because they are born in that world, but they can't enjoy the spiritual energy of that world. They can't cultivate, they can't change their fate, and they can't create their own lives. At this point she shook her head again and said, there is no right or wrong, and there is no such thing as true fairness. There is no such thing as absolute fairness. Everyone was silent. Fairness. This was something that they had to fight for themselves. Without strength, what kind of fairness were you thinking about? It was more like eating a fart. The black-robed man smiled and said, Miss Xiao Dao is right. There is no right or wrong between us and the sixth dimension, it's just that our standpoints are different. It's just like us and you. We came to snatch the study room because we want to survive. Zhou Xian suddenly shook his head and said, don't make it sound so dignified. Snatching things is snatching things, it doesn't matter what your purpose is. Just like me, if I don't have a wife, can I snatch your wife? If I don't snatch it, I'll be a bachelor. Therefore, it's not wrong for me to snatch your wife, it's just that our standpoints are different. Hearing Zhou Xian's words, Amu and the other girls shook their heads and laughed. This analogy was too strange. Xiao Dao looked at Zhou Xian. Although Zhou Xian's words were very vulgar, they were reasonable. There was still a right and wrong. The black-robed man looked at Zhou Xian and said with a smile, no matter what, I want that study room. Zhou Xian smiled and said, that's right. If you want to be a bad person, then do it thoroughly. Don't want to be a whore and also want to build a chastity memorial. However, what I don't understand is, why do you want to snatch the study room? Can this study room help you fight against the sixth dimension? The black-robed man nodded and said, it can. I don't know who the prophet is, nor do I know where he came from, but I know that the sixth dimension has a treasure in this study room. It was brought down from the sixth dimension by the prophet. Zhou Xian frowned slightly and said, treasure? What treasure? The black-robed man smiled and said, I can't tell you. Just as Zhou Xian was about to speak, a sword chime suddenly came from afar. Everyone turned their heads to look. There a sword light soared into the sky. The next moment, a woman walked out from the sword light. Arrow was wearing a silver armor and had a long sword at her waist. Her appearance had also changed. She was no longer the little girl from before, but now looked like a 17 or 18-year-old girl. After Arrow appeared, the countless experts of the Great Desolation country below suddenly cheered, and the cheers soared into the sky. In their hearts, Arrow was their faith. All the people of the Great Desolation country were looking at Arrow. In their eyes there was fanaticism and excitement. Arrow walked in front of Zhou Xian and the others. She looked directly at the black-robed man. The black-robed man sized up Arrow and said with a smile, as expected of the most outstanding person of the Cambrian, indeed powerful. As he spoke, he opened his palm and made a gesture of invitation. Please. As the voice fell, an invisible force suddenly shrouded the surroundings. In the field, except for him and Arrow, everyone else appeared silently thousands of meters away. The peak of the shattering void tier. Zhou Xian's face was a little gloomy, and at this time Xiao Dao, who was beside him, suddenly said, Martial Saint. This is a martial saint. P.S. To be honest, I don't write books for money. Writing books is a hobby. Those who want to tempt me with monthly votes, I tell you, dream on. Even if I starve to death, I will never bow to monthly votes. I have a bottom line. End of this chapter. Chapter 1138. Martial Saint. Zhou Xian looked at Xiao Dao. What martial saint? Xiao Dao said softly, the pinnacle of martial arts is martial saint. This kind of person is extremely rare even in the sixth dimension. No wonder he dared to wait for Arrow to break through. He has the capital to do so. Zhou Xian turned to look at the black-robed man and Arrow in the distance. The space they were in was very illusory, but it also felt very real. Both of them were in the shattering void tier. One was a swordsman. The other was a martial cultivator. At this time Xiao Dao suddenly said softly, watch carefully, it should give you a lot of inspiration. Zhou Xian nodded. At this time Arrow's left thumb flicked lightly, and the sword in her hand suddenly flew out. The sword instantly flew up, and then slashed at the black-robed man in an extremely graceful manner. The black-robed man slightly leaned to the side and dodged the sword by a hair's breadth. At this time an afterimage suddenly appeared in front of him. It was Arrow. The sword had returned to Arrow's hand at some unknown time, and she slashed horizontally, directly slashing at the black-robed man's throat. The black-robed man's body bent slightly backwards as if it was broken, and this bend directly caused Arrow's sword to cut through thin air. At the same time his right foot lightly tapped and his whole body instantly moved back 30 meters. He had just retreated when a sword light just happened to fall where he originally stood, and almost at the same instant that this sword light fell, another sword light appeared in front of him. Before the first sword was finished, another sword arrived. The black-robed man did not dodge this time because it was already impossible to dodge. When Arrow attacked with the first sword, she had already predicted the following 3 sword lights. The black-robed man suddenly put his hands together, and with this he directly blocked the sword light. However, in the next moment, 3 sword lights flickered around the black-robed man, and almost at the same time, 3 shadows of fists blasted on the 3 sword lights. Ping ping ping. With several muffled sounds, the 2 simultaneously retreated several dozen meters. After Arrow stopped, the sword in her hand suddenly flew out like a bolt of lightning. In the distance the black-robed man blasted out a punch. Hong! The sword light stopped about 10 feet away from the black-robed man. The black-robed man lightly stomped his right foot, and his whole body suddenly shattered the sword light. The next moment he was already in front of Arrow and his fist was aimed at Arrow's head. This punch looked like an ordinary punch without any energy fluctuations. At this time, Arrow suddenly became illusory. The black-robed man's fist struck empty air. Wherever his fist landed, the space there turned into nothingness, completely disappearing. The black-robed man abruptly moved sideways after his fist struck empty air. A ray of sword light brushed past his shoulder and slashed down. Almost at the instant the black-robed man moved sideways, the ray of sword light suddenly slashed horizontally. His sword missed. This was because the black-robed man had already retreated hundreds of feet away. He was floating in the air, and there was a shallow sword mark on his black robe. Meanwhile, Arrow suddenly walked towards the black-robed man with her sword in hand. As she walked, her body suddenly became illusory as if she didn't exist at all. In the distance, the black-robed man suddenly clenched his right hand, and then his left palm pressed down lightly. As he pressed down, the space around him suddenly shook like a wave of air. Meanwhile, Arrow stopped moving. She gazed at the black-robed man and then her figure vanished. The black-robed man's left hand suddenly pressed forward lightly, and at the same time his right hand blasted out towards the right. Bang! 2 rays of sword light suddenly erupted from the right and in front of the black-robed man. Meanwhile, the space around him suddenly trembled violently, and then an afterimage appeared in front of the black-robed man. It was Arrow. In an instant, an expanse of rays of sword light crisscrossed through the space. It wasn't because there were many rays of sword light, but because Arrow's attacks were too fast. Before the first ray of sword light was finished, another ray of sword light followed. At this moment, outsiders couldn't see what was happening in that space because the entire space was filled with rays of sword light. Zhou Xian turned to look at Xiao Dao. Xiao Dao didn't speak, but his expression gradually became solemn. Noticing this, Zhou Xian's expression also sank. At this moment, the space in the distance suddenly trembled violently, and then countless rays of sword light disappeared. At this moment, an afterimage retreated rapidly. That afterimage was Arrow. As she madly retreated, fists continued to appear in the space in front of Aluo. Each fist would force Aluo back dozens of feet. In just a few breaths of time, Aluo had retreated more than 10,000 feet, and the 10,000 feet of space in front of her was filled with fists. These fist prints stayed in the space for a long time without dispersing. After Arrow stopped, she suddenly raised her sword to block. A fist print slammed directly onto her sword. Bang! Arrow retreated by dozens of feet again. As soon as she stopped, another fist imprint appeared. At this moment, Aluo suddenly slashed his sword across his neck. In an instant, the fist print that had just appeared in front of her was reduced to nothingness. At the same time, all the fist prints that stayed in the space in front of Arrow instantly vanished. Immediately after that, the space in front of her suddenly split open. This split extended for thousands of feet, and at the end of that split space a person appeared. It was the black-robed man. At this moment, there was a shallow sword mark between the black-robed man's brows, and this sword mark just happened to cut open his skin. It wasn't fatal, but it was disfiguring. The black-robed old man's expression became unprecedentedly serious when he saw this scene. This was the first time he'd seen the black-robed man suffer a loss. In the distance, the black-robed man touched his forehead and looked at the blood on his fingertips. He chuckled lightly and then he looked at Arrow. What a powerful sword strike! Arrow's face was expressionless as she walked towards the black-robed man. At this moment, the black-robed man suddenly said, "Even if the two of us fought for 10 days, we still wouldn't be able to tell the difference between life and death." Arrow stopped and looked at the black-robed man. "You can call for help." The black-robed man smiled slightly. "This person definitely has to be called, but not now. This time I came mainly to personally understand your strength." As he spoke, he looked at Zhou Xian. "And you?" Zhou Xian smiled. "Understand me?" The black-robed man nodded. "Zhou Xian, that study can't display its true value in your hands. If you're willing to give it to us, you can choose any treasure in the upper realms." Zhou Xian opened his palm and the executing heaven sword appeared in it. "Is there a treasure in the upper realms that's better than this?" The black-robed man glanced at the executing heaven sword and shook his head. Zhou Xian took out the soul-suppressing sword and the Taiji shield. "Is there a treasure in the upper realms that's better than this?" The black-robed man fell silent. Zhou Xian took out the world prison pagoda. "Is there a treasure in the upper realms that's better than this?" The black-robed man looked at Zhou Xian. Are you flaunting your wealth in front of me? Zhou Xian smiled. Look, if you want a sword, I have the sharpest sword. If you want a shield, I have the hardest shield. Tell me, why should I trade with you? Or do you think that I, Zhou Xian, am stupid? The black-robed man smiled. We will meet again. As he spoke, he and the black-robed old man became illusory. Zhou Xian looked at Xiao Dao. Can you make them stay? Xiao Dao shook his head. At this time, the black-robed man and the black-robed man had already disappeared. In the square, Zhou Xian looked up at the sky with an expressionless face. He was too passive. He could only take a beating. He had no initiative at all. This was not good at all. Zhou Xian suddenly said, Can we go up? Xiao Dao looked at Zhou Xian. You want to go up? Zhou Xian nodded. Xiao Dao shook his head. Not now. My strength doesn't allow me to. Zhou Xian was about to speak when the Tendo suddenly appeared again. Everyone looked at the Tendo. The Tendo looked at Zhou Xian. She smiled. I'll take you somewhere. Do you want to go? Go somewhere. Zhou Xian frowned. What place? The Tendo smiled. You'll know when you get there. Let me tell you. There are benefits. Zhou Xian looked at the Tendo. You're not trying to scam me, are you? The Tendo blinked. You can say that. Zhou Xian was speechless. The Tendo continued, but there are really benefits. Zhou Xian asked, What benefits? The Tendo smiled. Are you going? Zhou Xian pondered for a moment. Then he said, I'm going. Anyway, he was barefooted, so he wasn't afraid of those who wore shoes. Who's afraid of who? The Tendo smiled. Let's go. With that, she turned and left. At this moment, Xiao Dao suddenly appeared in front of the Tendo. I'll go with you. The Tendo smiled. Xiao Dao, you'd better hurry up and recuperate. It's not just them. You're in danger too. After all, you haven't fully recovered your strength. At this moment, Zhou Xian suddenly took out some purple gas and gave it to Xiao Dao. He smiled. Miss Xiao Dao, you should recuperate first. If she wanted to harm me, she wouldn't have used such tricks. Xiao Dao glanced at the Tendo and nodded. As Zhou Xian said, the Tendo would not harm Zhou Xian in a short time. Because without Zhou Xian, she would have to face the upper realm by herself. Moreover, killing Zhou Xian would not do her any good. Xiao Dao put away the purple gas, while Zhou Xian and the Tendo disappeared in the distant sky. In the field, Arrow suddenly said, Too passive. Xiao Dao looked at Arrow. Arrow said softly, This world is not fun anymore. Everyone, Xiao Dao took a deep look at Arrow. She knew that Arrow wanted to see the outside world. After all, Arrow had reached the peak of this world. It was normal for him to yearn for the outside world. In the distant sky, Zhou Xian followed the Tendo and slowly walked forward. After a while, the two came to a starry sky. The Tendo looked around and said softly, Look how beautiful this starry sky is. Zhou Xian's expression was a little strange. Did this woman bring him to see the scenery? The Tendo smiled softly and said, In the beginning, this world was more beautiful. Unfortunately, you have not seen it. Zhou Xian suddenly asked, Miss Tendo, how was this universe formed? The Tendo looked at Zhou Xian and said, You asked this question. Zhou Xian asked again, You don't know? The Tendo shook her head and said, The origin of the universe is not something we should worry about. Zhou Xian suddenly asked, What about the origin of life? How did the first life come about? Do you know? The Tendo looked at Zhou Xian and slowly clenched her right hand. Chapter 1139. Seeing Tendo clenching her fists, Zhou Xian's expression changed and he quickly said, I won't ask any more. Tiandao blinked. Are you really not going to ask? Zhou Xian nodded. I won't ask any more. His intuition told him that this woman in front of him definitely wanted to hit him. Tendo smiled and said, Actually, these questions you asked are also what I want to know. Zhou Xian frowned slightly. You don't know either? Tendo nodded. I'm not omniscient. Saying that, she walked into the distance. She glanced at the starry sky in front of her and said softly, Before I appeared, this universe already existed. Zhou Xian was silent. Tendo pointed at the planets in the distance and said softly, Look, these countless planets in this universe are rotating on their own in a regular pattern. There are also all living things. If you look carefully, you will find that everything is operating and developing according to a certain pattern. The sun sets and rises, the tides rise and fall, the four seasons change, birth, aging, sickness and death. Saying that, she looked at Zhou Xian. Someone once told me that this is the Tao. The Tao is natural and the Tao is ever-changing. However, how does this Tao exist? Is it natural or man-made? If it exists naturally, then how did this universe form? Who was the first life in this universe? How was it formed? Zhou Xian was silent. Tendo said again, Great Tao, karma, fate. Who was the one who first proposed these? Speaking of fate, birth, aging, sickness and death, is this the fate of all living things? Not to mention humans, even an entire universe would one day perish. Many people say that they want to defy the heavens and change their fate. Since ancient times, who can truly reverse life and death? Saying that, she looked at Zhou Xian and said with a smile, All living things in the universe have their own fate. What do you mean by changing fate? Don't you know that the fate you should change is also your own fate? Zhou Xian suddenly asked, What about the woman in the plain dress? Tendo was silent. Zhou Xian looked at Tendo and said, I'm not trying to argue with you. I'm just asking. The Tendo said softly, She has gone too far. Zhou Xian was puzzled. What do you mean? The Tendo chuckled and said, She has already embarked on the Great Tao. Walk out of the Great Tao. Zhou Xian said in a low voice, Release one. Tendo nodded. Currently, the highest realm known in our universe is solitary release. Solitary release is not within the Great Tao and is not bound by fate and karma. Only when one reaches this level can it be considered true freedom. However, because of you, she jumped in again. Of course, her behavior is against the rules. After jumping out, she jumped back in. This is very unfair to those of us who are still within the rules. It's like a scholar going to a private school to study with those children. It's not fair. Zhou Xian was speechless. The Tendo said, However, she also has her own troubles and her troubles should be related to you. Zhou Xian said softly, Xiao Dao said that it's my karma. The Tendo nodded slightly. You have great karma, karma that doesn't belong to this world. Zhou Xian looked at the Tendo and said, Miss Tendo, why are you telling me so much? The Tendo smiled and said, There's no other reason. I'm just chatting. Zhou Xian suddenly asked, You want to protect this universe, right? The Tendo nodded. Yes. The mistakes of all living things should not be borne by this universe. Zhou Xian looked at the Tendo and said, The fifth dimension has nothing to do with you? The Tendo smiled and said, Don't think too much about it. I still don't have the ability to create a fifth dimension. Don't care too much about the living things of this universe, especially the humans. From the point of view of a bystander, don't you think that the actions of humans and many other races really deserve to die? Zhou Xian was silent. The Tendo said softly, Among all the races, humans are the most greedy. In order to plunder, they are willing to do anything. The appearance of the fifth dimension is the universe's way of protecting itself. Regarding this, I can only say that all living things deserve to be punished. As she said this, she glanced at Zhou Xian and said, Don't think about stopping this fifth dimension. Let alone you, even that plainly dressed woman can't stop it. If you stop it, the universe will be destroyed and all living things in this universe will die. Zhou Xian was silent and his heart was filled with complex emotions. Fifth dimension tribulation. This tribulation was caused by this universe. If he wanted to stop this tribulation, he had to destroy this universe. And destroying this universe was equivalent to destroying all living things. Leaving this universe. This was the only choice for all living things in this universe. As if she knew what Zhou Xian was thinking, the Tendo suddenly said, Leaving this universe is indeed a good choice, but how many people can leave this universe? Do they have the ability? Even if everyone has the ability to leave, where can they go? Go to the sixth dimension? Do they welcome you? As she said this, she paused and then said, Rather than placing your hopes on other universes, why not properly protect this universe? As she said this, she seemed to have thought of something and shook her head with a smile. Actually, people are selfish. For example, the first group of human experts. Their thinking was very simple. In any case, as long as I'm alive, it's fine as long as the universe isn't destroyed. As for after I die, who cares if a flood overflows the heavens? To put it simply, the ancestors enjoy a blessing, while the descendants suffer a calamity. Zhou Xian softly said, Is there really no other way? The Tendo looked at Zhou Xian and said, Do you want to save all living things in this universe? Zhou Xian said, Is there no way to make the best of both worlds? The Tendo looked straight at Yi Xian and said, there is. I can temporarily prevent the fifth dimension's calamity, but the people in this universe have to change. Everyone will become ordinary people again. They will no longer be able to cultivate, they will no longer be able to plunder spiritual energy, and they will no longer be able to destroy this world's spiritual energy. All cultivators will have to disperse their own cultivation and return the spiritual energy to this universe, allowing it to recover. Yi Xian shook his head. Impossible. Have everyone disperse their own cultivation? That was simply impossible. No one would be willing to do that. Even the woman in the plain dress couldn't do that. The only thing she could do was to kill everyone with a single sword strike. At this moment he finally understood what the woman in the plain dress had said before. This was a calamity in the hearts of people, it wasn't something that could be solved by force. The Tendo looked at Yi Xian and said with a smile, you see, you also think that it's impossible. Therefore I never thought about how to save the people in this universe because no one is willing to change. Of course, if they want to leave this universe I won't stop them. However, if they want to destroy this universe, that's impossible. Yi Xian looked at the Tendo and said, why can you stop the fifth dimension's calamity? The Tendo blinked and said, I lied to you. Actually, I can't do that. After saying this, she walked into the distance. Yi Xian looked at the Tendo. He knew that this woman could stop the fifth dimension's calamity. Of course, he wouldn't ask her to do anything. Yi Xian was no saint. Now that he thought about it, the Tendo didn't owe this universe anything. She also didn't have any obligation to protect the people of this universe. Just like the woman in the plain dress, he absolutely wouldn't ask the woman in the plain dress to protect this universe at all costs. Because she also didn't owe this universe anything. If she had the ability, then she could do whatever she wanted. That was her own business. If she didn't have the ability, then she shouldn't care about anything. If she had the ability, then she should do whatever she wanted. In any case, he had already thought about it. If the fifth dimension's calamity really came, he packed his loved ones into the tower and ran for his life. Stop the fifth dimension's calamity? That was simply unrealistic. There was no way to stop it because stopping the fifth dimension's calamity would mean destroying the universe. If the universe was destroyed, was that any different from a fifth dimension's calamity? Thinking of this, Yi Xian shook his head and sighed. No matter what he chose, he would die. Not to mention escaping, the sixth dimension didn't welcome people here. At this time, the distant Tendo suddenly said, we've arrived. Arrived. Yi Xian looked up. In that starry sky he saw a bamboo house. The bamboo house was floating in the starry sky. Yi Xian looked at the Tendo. The Tendo smiled and said, this is where I live. After saying this, she brought Yi Xian to the front of the bamboo house. On the bamboo door there were two small words. Elegant residence. Elegant residence? Yi Xian softly said, this name is elegant and small. The Tendo smiled and said, in countless years, you are the second person to come to this bamboo house. Yi Xian asked, who was the first? The Tendo faintly smiled and said, the prophet. The prophet. Yi Xian said in a deep voice, he came here. The Tendo nodded and said, he came here. He chatted with me for a while. I have to say he is a very knowledgeable person. In terms of fighting, he certainly can't beat the plain-dressed woman. However, in terms of understanding of this world, I feel that no one can compare to him. After saying this, she brought Yi Xian into the bamboo house. After entering the bamboo house, Yi Xian discovered that there were huge bookshelves inside the bamboo house. On these bookshelves there were countless ancient books. Yi Xian was shocked by the scene in front of him. The Tendo looked at Yi Xian and said with a smile, surprised. Yi Xian nodded. Tiandao pointed at the ancient books and said with a smile, these ancient books were created by the various races. They contain knowledge and are very, very interesting. Unfortunately, many races, including your human race, don't care about the knowledge and culture of their ancestors at all. They only care about some cultivation ancient books or secret techniques and mystiques. Actually, in my opinion, those humanities, history and academic studies are more interesting. Yi Xian looked at the Tendo and said, what do you mean? The Tendo smiled and said, let me ask you a question. What is the structure of space? Yi Xian was stunned. The Tendo smiled and said, see that? You have the space Tao law and can use space. However, you don't understand space much. You are all learning the form and not the essence. As she spoke, she paused before continuing, I admire the prophet because everyone else is cultivating the Tao, cultivating immortality, cultivating the sword. Only he is cultivating, of course. It is quite tragic for him because he schemed against someone he should not have schemed against. As such, the one who cultivates is killed by the one who cultivates the sword. After saying this, she looked at Zhou Xian and said, "This cruel fact tells us that no matter what we cultivate, we must have great strength. Otherwise, it will all be for nothing. So, ever since he died, I started to repair everything." Zhou Xian was speechless. P.S. Recently, the editor asked me that my monthly votes seem to be a little low. Is there something wrong with me? I said that the readers don't go to work and are short of money, so I don't have monthly votes. Chapter 1140. Zhou Xian suddenly asked, "Are you a swordsman?" Tendo smiled and said, "You can say so." Zhou Xian hesitated and then said, "Let's spar." Tendo shook her head. Zhou Xian was a little puzzled. "Why?" Tendo chuckled. "I cultivate the killing sword Tao. My sword is only for the purpose of taking lives. If I spar with you, your cultivation is not high enough. It will be difficult for you to resist." Zhou Xian hurriedly said, "My body is very strong." Tendo shook her head. "In this world, there are indeed not many people who can break your body, but this person in front of you can." Zhou Xian. Tendo sized up Zhou Xian's body and then said, "Actually, your body is not strong at all." Zhou Xian looked at Tendo. "What do you mean?" Tendo suddenly pointed a finger at Zhou Xian's chest. In an instant, Zhou Xian's expression changed greatly and he hurriedly retreated. When he stopped, he looked at his chest. At this moment, the skin on his chest was disintegrating bit by bit. At this moment, Tendo withdrew her finger, and Zhou Xian's body instantly returned to normal. Zhou Xian looked at Tendo and said in shock, "What kind of divine ability is this?" Tendo smiled and said, "It's not a divine ability, just a simple finger." Zhou Xian shook his head. "A simple finger can't break my body." Tendo smiled and then said, "You still know nothing about power." Zhou Xian. Tian Dao suddenly said, "Actually, the martial arts in this world can be divided into 3 realms. The first realm is to go from nothing to something. The second realm is to go from something to nothing. The third realm is to go from something to nothing." Saying that, she looked at Zhou Xian. "Do you understand what I mean?" Zhou Xian blinked. "I understand. But I still want to hear your explanation." Tendo shook her head. "What do you understand?" Zhou Xian. Tendo sat in front of Zhou Xian. She took out a small roasted fish and gently took a bite, then said, "Let me give you an example. For example, when you first start to cultivate the sword, you only know a little bit of sword Tao. At this time, the sword Tao moves you see are simple moves. In other words, the so-called mountain is a mountain, the water is water. But when your martial arts reach a certain level, the sword Tao moves you see are no longer simple sword Tao moves. It may be a kind of sword Tao principle, a kind of sword Tao concept, a kind of sword Tao concept, a kind of sword Tao life. This is, the mountain is not a mountain, the water is not water." As she spoke, she looked at Zhou Xian and said with a smile, "When you reach the peak, the swordsmanship will no longer be a simple swordsmanship. Others will not be able to tell that you know the swordsmanship at all. This is what it means to return to one's natural state. Mountains are still mountains and water is still water." Zhou Xian was silent for a moment, then said, "What realm am I in now?" Tendo said with a smile, "You have reached all 3 realms." Zhou Xian was stunned, then said, "Is there a but?" Tendo blinked. "Correct. Although you have reached all 3 realms. But you have not comprehended any of the realms, so, strictly speaking, you have not reached all 3 realms." Zhou Xian said in a low voice, "Is it really that serious?" Tendo smiled, then continued, "Arrow has not reached the realm of sword Tao. Qingqing Yi family ancestral temple. Ancestors. Zhou Xian has no talent, no virtue. From now on, Zhou Xian's position as the crown prince is removed. Yi Lang will succeed." The one who spoke was an old man in a black robe. Not far behind the old man stood a young man. The young man had a faint smile on his face. This person was Yi Lang. And on both sides were the Yi family elders. "Why?" At this time, a timid voice suddenly rang out in the ancestral temple. Everyone turned to look and saw a little girl standing at the door. She was about 12 or 13 years old, and her hands were tightly gripping the hem of her skirt. Her face had a sickly pallor and she looked a little weak. There was even a trace of fear in her eyes. This little girl was called Yi Ling, Zhou Xian's younger sister. When she heard that the family wanted to remove Zhou Xian, she rushed over despite her illness. The black-robed old man frowned. Yiling, what are you doing? The little girl called Yiling bowed to the people in the ancestral temple and said timidly, Great Elder, my brother Zhou Xian is the crown prince. Why did you cripple him for no reason? The great elder looked coldly at Yiling. This is a family matter, what are you interrupting for? Leave. Yiling was obviously afraid, not daring to look at the great elder, but she did not leave. Instead she plucked up her courage and entered the ancestral temple. Once again she bowed to the elders. Dear elders, my brother is fighting with the Li family over the mining rights at Nanshan. He's fighting for the family and it's unknown whether he's dead or alive. Yet the family is using a groundless excuse to strip him of his position. This is really unfair. Impudent. The great elder suddenly raged. Whether he's crippled or not, it's not up to a little girl like you to decide. Men, drag her away. At this time the new crown prince Yilang suddenly laughed. You should be flogged 30 times as a warning to others. The great elder coldly replied, Then flog him 30 times. Very quickly 2 Yi family guards rushed in. Yiling clenched her fists and said angrily, This is unfair. My brother has risked his life for the family for so many years and even now he's fighting for the family. The family is unfair to him. One of the guards glanced at the new crown prince Yilang. He knew that his chance to shine had come. The guard sneered, Young Master Yilang inherits the crown prince's position and it's everyone's wish. What are you yelling about? As he spoke he raised his hand and slapped Yiling's face. Slap. A crisp slap sounded, and the right side of Yiling's face instantly turned red and swollen. However, she didn't cry and only clutched her cheek tightly. Yilang looked at the guard and smiled. What's your name? The guard quickly bowed. This subordinate Zhang Mu greets the crown prince. Yilang nodded. You're not bad. After I become the crown prince I'll need 10 personal guards. From now on you'll be my personal guard. Hearing this, Zhang Mu was overjoyed and quickly bowed deeply. This subordinate is willing to go through fire and water for the crown prince, and I'm willing to die 1,000 deaths. Yilang nodded. Drag him away. This person is causing trouble in the ancestral hall. Do not hold back. Understood? Zhang Mu glanced at Yilang and when he saw the killing intent in Yilang's eyes, he understood. He immediately grabbed Yiling's hair and dragged her out. At this time Zhang Mu seemed to have seen something and he suddenly stopped. Within the ancestral hall, everyone turned their heads to look outside. Not far from the ancestral hall, a young man was walking towards the ancestral hall. He was dressed in a tight-fitting robe that was tattered and covered in blood. This person was Zhou Xian who had rushed back from the Nanshan. Seeing Zhou Xian, Yilang's lips curled into a cold smile. Within the ancestral hall, all the elders were frowning. The great elder narrowed his eyes and his face was dark. No one knew what he was thinking. From afar, when Zhou Xian saw Zhang Mu dragging Yiling, his face turned savage. Who gave you the guts to touch my sister? When Zhang Mu saw Zhou Xian, his face changed. He quickly looked at Yilang and was about to speak. At this time Zhou Xian leaped in front of him like a ferocious tiger. Before the latter could react, Zhou Xian's fist landed on his face. Bang! Zhang Mu's head spun and he stumbled and fell. Yilang did not stop there and charged towards Zhang Mu again. At this time Yilang suddenly roared, Zhou Xian, he's my man, how dare you? Zhou Xian suddenly stepped on Zhang Mu's chest. Pooh! Zhang Mu spat out a mouthful of blood. Seeing this, Yilang's face turned ugly, while Zhou Xian lifted his head to look at him, asking savagely, your man? As he spoke he stomped on Zhang Mu's face. Zhang Mu's face turned into a bloody mess as he screamed, Prince, save me. Zhou Xian did not care about Zhang Mu as he walked to Yiling's side. Seeing Yiling's state, Zhou Xian felt as though his heart was being sliced by a knife. He clenched his fists and his entire body trembled. When Yiling saw Zhou Xian, her tears flowed. Brother, it hurts. It hurts. Hearing this, Zhou Xian's expression turned savage. In the next instant he charged in front of Zhang Mu and kicked Zhang Mu's head. Qingqing Yi Clan Ancestral Hall. Ancestors, Zhou Xian has no talent, no virtue. From now on Zhou Xian's position as prince shall be replaced by Yilang. The one who spoke was an old man in black robes. Not far behind the old man, there was a youth with a faint smile on his face. This person was Yi Lang. On both sides there were the elders of the Yi clan. Why? Right at this moment, a slightly timid voice suddenly resounded within the ancestral hall. Everyone turned to look and saw a little girl standing at the door. She was about 12 or 13 years old, and her hands were tightly gripping the hem of her skirt. Her face had a sickly pallor and she looked a little weak. There was even a trace of fear in her eyes. This girl was called Yi Ling and she was Yi Xian's younger sister. When she heard that Yi Xian was to be replaced, she disregarded her illness and rushed over. The black-robed old man frowned. Yi Ling, what are you doing? The little girl called Yi Ling bowed to the people in the hall and asked timidly, Great Elder, my brother Yi Xian is the prince. Why did you cripple him for no reason? The Great Elder looked at Yi Ling coldly. This is a matter of the clan, what are you interrupting for? Leave. Yi Ling was clearly a little fearful. She did not dare to look the Great Elder in the eye, but she did not leave. Instead, she mustered up her courage and walked into the ancestral hall. She bowed to the elders on both sides of the hall and said, Elders, my brother is currently fighting with the Li family for the mining rights of the mine in Nanshan. He is now fighting for the family and it is unknown whether he is alive or dead. However, the family has used a groundless excuse to remove his position as the crown prince. This is truly unfair. Impudent. The Great Elder suddenly raged. Whether or not he's crippled, it's not up to a little girl like you to decide. Men, drag her away. At this time the new prince Yi Lang suddenly laughed. He should be flogged 30 times as a warning to others. The Great Elder replied coldly, then flog him 30 times. Very quickly 2 Yi clan guards rushed in. Yi Ling clenched her fists and said angrily, This is unfair. My brother has risked his life for the clan for so many years and even now he's fighting for the clan. The clan is unfair to him. One of the guards glanced at the new prince Yi Lang. He knew that this was his chance to shine. The guard sneered, Young Master Yi Lang inherits the title of prince. What are you shouting for? As he spoke he raised his hand and slapped Yi Ling's face. Slap. A crisp slap sounded and the right side of Yi Ling's face instantly swelled up. But she did not cry and only held her cheek tightly. Yi Lang looked at the guard and smiled, What's your name? The guard quickly bowed. This subordinate Zhang Mu greets the prince. Yi Lang nodded, You're not bad. After I become the prince I need 10 guards. You can be my guard from now on. Hearing this, Zhang Mu was overjoyed and quickly bowed deeply. This subordinate is willing to go through fire and water for the prince, even if it means death. Yi Lang nodded, Drag him away. This person is causing trouble in the ancestral hall. Don't hold back, understand? Zhang Mu glanced at Yi Lang and when he saw the murderous intent in Yi Lang's eyes, he understood. He immediately grabbed Yi Ling's hair and dragged her out. At this moment, Zhang Mu suddenly stopped as if he had seen something. In the ancestral hall, everyone turned their heads to look outside. Not far from the ancestral hall, a young man was walking towards the ancestral hall. The young man was wearing a tight-fitting robe that was tattered, and there was blood everywhere. The young man was Yi Xian who had rushed back from Nanshan. Seeing Yi Xian, Yi Lang's mouth curled into a cold smile. In the ancestral hall the elders frowned. The Great Elder narrowed his eyes and his face was dark. No one knew what he was thinking. From afar, when Yi Xian saw Zhang Mu dragging Yi Ling, his face turned savage. Who gave you the guts to touch my sister? When Zhang Mu saw Yi Xian, his face changed. He quickly looked at Yi Lang and was about to speak. At this time Yi Xian leaped in front of him like a ferocious tiger. Before the latter could react, Yi Xian's fist landed on his face. Ping. Zhang Mu felt a wave of dizziness and he stumbled and fell. However, Yi Ling did not stop there. He rushed towards Zhang Mu again. At this time Yi Lang suddenly roared, Yi Xian, he's my man, how dare you? Yi Xian suddenly stepped on Zhang Mu's chest. Pooh! Zhang Mu spat out a mouthful of blood. Seeing this, Yi Lang's face turned ugly, while Yi Xian lifted his head to look at him, asking savagely, your man? As he spoke he stepped on Zhang Mu's face. Zhang Mu's face turned into a bloody mess as he screamed, Prince, save me. Yi Xian did not care about Zhang Mu as he walked to Yi Ling's side. Seeing Yi Ling's state, Yi Xian felt as though his heart was being sliced by a knife. He clenched his fists and his entire body trembled. When Yi Ling saw Yi Xian, her tears flowed, Brother, it hurts, it hurts. Hearing this, Yi Xian's expression turned savage. In the next instant he charged in front of Zhang Mu and kicked Zhang Mu's head. Ping! Chapter 1141. Refuse. Yi Xian's face was as gloomy as water. At this moment his heart was incomparably complicated. This woman is clearly saying that she wants to make use of you. However, this is beneficial to her, at least for the time being. Refuse? He really couldn't think of a reason to refuse. Not refuse. If he didn't refuse, he was a bit unwilling. But soon this kind of unwillingness disappeared without a trace. Yi Xian suddenly smiled and said, I think what you said just now is very reasonable. Tendo blinked. Which one? Yi Xian said seriously, you said looking at things from a different angle. I suddenly feel that you don't want to use me at all. You just see that I have talent, think that I have value, and want to invest in me so that I can help you protect the fifth dimension in the future. Tendo blinked and froze. Yi Xian went on, to put it simply, it's because I, Yi Xian, am excellent enough. That's why you want to help me and build a good relationship with me. Tendo was silent for a moment and then said, I suddenly feel a bit regretful. Yi Xian. Tendo looked at Yi Xian and said with a smile, actually you are quite amazing really. Let's not talk about other aspects, just in terms of face I admit that I am inferior. Throughout the ages I found that no one's face can compare to yours. Yi Xian. Tendo said again, let's not worry about this problem. This time I asked you to come because I want to improve you. Do you want to start with the sword path or the body? Yi Xian thought for a moment and then said, what do you think? Tendo said softly, in terms of sword path, it is difficult to solve it in a few words. Let's first cultivate the body. First we will improve your body so that you won't die so easily. Yi Xian was speechless. Tendo opened her palm, and an ancient book suddenly flew out from the bookshelf behind her. She handed the ancient book to Yi Xian. This is the experience of some cultivators from ancient to modern times. Take a good look at it, understand it thoroughly, and then we will begin. This way, if you encounter any problems during your cultivation, you will know how to deal with it and also know what to do to benefit yourself. Yi Xian nodded. He opened the ancient book and as he read, his expression became solemn. The Tendo smiled and said, is it useful? Yi Xian said solemnly, of great use. With that he continued reading. Needless to say, even though he was a body cultivator, he didn't know much about the path of body cultivators. After reading the cultivation experiences of these former body cultivators, he realized that he'd thought too simply of the path of body cultivators. Body cultivator. It wasn't just about cultivating the body but also cultivating the soul. What did a powerful physical body need to be supported? Divine soul. To be strong on the outside, one must be strong on the inside. In addition, there were many kinds of body cultivators, at least hundreds of schools, and these schools' cultivation methods were different. Some focused on the skin and flesh, some focused on the muscles and bones, some focused on the internal organs. Very few could take care of all. After about an hour, Yi Xian put down the ancient book in his hand. At this time the Tendo was no longer in the bamboo house. Yi Xian got up and walked outside the bamboo house. The Tendo was roasting fish in the yard. Yi Xian walked in front of the Tendo. She glanced at the small fish and said with a smile, I thought you didn't know how to kill. The Tendo glanced at it. Qingqing Yi Family Ancestral Temple. Ancestors. Yi Xian has no talent, no virtue. From now on Yi Xian's position as the crown prince will be replaced by Yi Lang. The one who spoke was an old man in a black robe. Not far behind the old man stood a young man with a faint smile on the corner of his mouth. This person was Yi Lang. On both sides were the Yi family's elders. Why? At this time, a timid voice suddenly sounded in the ancestral temple. Everyone turned to look and saw a little girl standing at the door. She was about 12 or 13 years old, and her hands were tightly gripping the hem of her skirt. Her face had a sickly pallor and she looked a little weak. There was even a trace of fear in her eyes. The little girl was called Yi Ling. She was Yi Xian's sister. When she heard that the family wanted to remove Yi Xian, she disregarded her illness and rushed over. The black-robed old man frowned. Yi Ling, what are you doing? The little girl called Yi Ling bowed to the people in the ancestral temple and said timidly, Great Elder, my brother Yi Xian is the crown prince. Why did you cripple him for no reason? The great elder looked coldly at Yi Ling. This is a family matter. What are you interrupting for? Leave. Yiling was obviously afraid and did not dare to look at the great elder. However, she did not leave. Instead, she mustered up her courage and walked into the ancestral temple. She bowed again to the elders on both sides. "Dear elders, my brother is fighting with the Li family over the mining rights at Nanshan. He is fighting for the family and it is unknown whether he is dead or alive. Yet the family is using a groundless excuse to strip him of his position. This is really unfair. Impudent." The great elder suddenly raged. "Whether he's stripped or not, it's not up to a little girl like you to decide. Men, drag her away." At this time the new crown prince Yilang suddenly laughed. "You should be flogged 30 times as a warning to others." The great elder coldly replied, "Then flog him 30 times. Very quickly 2 Yi family's guards rushed in. Yiling clenched her fists and said angrily, "This is unfair. My brother has risked his life for the family for so many years. Even now he is fighting for the family. The family is unfair to him." One of the guards glanced at the new crown prince Yilang. He knew that his chance to shine had come. The guard sneered, "Young master Yilang inherits the crown prince's position. What are you yelling about?" As he spoke, he raised his hand and slapped Yiling's face. Slap. A crisp slap sounded. Yiling's right cheek instantly turned red and swollen. However, she didn't cry. She just held her cheek tightly. Yilang looked at the guard and smiled. "What's your name?" The guard hurriedly bowed. "This subordinate Zhang Mu greets the crown prince." Yilang nodded. "You're not bad. After I become the crown prince, I'll need 10 personal guards. You can be my personal guard from now on." Hearing this, Zhang Mu was overjoyed. He hurriedly bowed deeply. "This subordinate is willing to go through fire and water for the crown prince." Yilang nodded slightly. "Drag him away. This person is disturbing the ancestral hall. Don't hold back. Understood?" Zhang Mu glanced at Yilang. When he saw the murderous intent in Yilang's eyes, he understood. He immediately grabbed Yiling's hair and dragged her out. At this moment, Zhang Mu seemed to have seen something and suddenly stopped. In the ancestral hall, everyone turned their heads to look outside. Not far from the ancestral hall, a young man was walking towards the ancestral hall. The young man was wearing a tight-fitting robe. The robe was tattered and covered in blood. The young man was Zhou Xian, who had rushed back from Nanshan. Seeing Zhou Xian, Yilang's mouth curled into a cold smile. In the ancestral hall, the elders frowned. The great elder narrowed his eyes. His face was dark and gloomy. No one knew what he was thinking. From afar, when Zhou Xian saw Zhang Mu dragging Yiling, his face turned savage. "Who gave you the guts to touch my sister?" When Zhang Mu saw Zhou Xian, his face changed. He hurriedly looked at Yilang and was about to speak. At this moment, Zhou Xian leaped in front of him like a ferocious tiger. Before the latter could react, Zhou Xian's fist landed on his face. Ping. Zhang Mu felt his head spin and he stumbled and fell. Yilang did not stop there. He rushed towards Zhang Mu again. At this time, Yilang suddenly roared, "Zhou Xian, he's my man. How dare you?" Zhou Xian suddenly stepped on Zhang Mu's chest. Pooh. Zhang Mu spat out a mouthful of blood. Seeing this, Yilang's face turned ugly. Zhou Xian lifted his head to look at him, asking savagely, "Your man?" As he spoke, he stomped on Zhang Mu's face. Zhang Mu's face turned into a bloody mess as he screamed, "Prince, save me." Zhou Xian did not care about Zhang Mu as he walked to Yiling's side. Seeing Yiling's state, Zhou Xian felt as though his heart was being cut by a knife. He clenched his fists and his entire body trembled. When Yiling saw Zhou Xian, her tears flowed. "Brother, it hurts, it hurts." Hearing this, Zhou Xian's expression turned savage. In the next instant, he charged in front of Zhang Mu and kicked Zhang Mu's head. Qingqing Yi Clan Ancestral Hall. Ancestors, Zhou Xian has no talent, no virtue. From now on, Zhou Xian's position as prince shall be replaced by Yilang. The one who spoke was an old man in black robes. Not far behind the old man, there was a youth with a faint smile on his face. This person was Yilang. On both sides there were the elders of the Yi clan. "Why?" At this time, a timid voice rang out in the ancestral hall. Everyone turned to look and saw a little girl standing at the door. She was about 12 or 13 years old, and her hands were tightly gripping the hem of her skirt. Her face had a sickly pallor and she looked a little weak. There was even a trace of fear in her eyes. This girl was called Yiling and she was Yi Xian's younger sister. When she heard that the clan wanted to remove Yi Xian from his position, she disregarded her illness and rushed over. The black-robed old man frowned. Yiling, what are you doing? The little girl called Yiling bowed to the people in the ancestral hall and asked timidly, Great Elder, my brother Yi Xian is the prince. Why did you cripple him for no reason? The Great Elder looked at Yiling coldly. This is a matter of the clan, what are you interrupting for? Leave. Yiling was obviously afraid and did not dare to look at the Great Elder. However, she did not leave. Instead, she plucked up her courage and walked into the ancestral hall. Once again she bowed to the elders. Dear elders, my brother is fighting with the Li clan for the rights to the mine. He is fighting for the clan and it is unknown whether he is dead or alive. Yet the clan is using a groundless excuse to strip him of his position. This is really unfair. Impudent. The Great Elder suddenly raged. Whether he's stripped or not, it's not up to a little girl like you to decide. Men, drag her away. At this time the new prince Yilang suddenly laughed. He should be flogged 30 times as a warning to others. The Great Elder replied coldly, then flog him 30 times. Very quickly 2 Yi clan guards rushed in. Yiling clenched her fists and said angrily, This is unfair. My brother has risked his life for the clan for so many years and even now he is fighting for the clan. The clan is unfair to him. One of the guards glanced at the new prince Yilang. He knew that his chance to shine had come. The guard sneered, Young Master Yilang inherits the prince's position and it's everyone's wish. What are you shouting for? As he spoke he raised his hand and slapped Yiling's face. Slap. A crisp slap sounded, and the right side of Yiling's face instantly turned red and swollen. However, she did not cry and only held her cheek tightly. Yilang looked at the guard and said with a smile, What's your name? The guard quickly bowed. This subordinate Zhang Mu greets the prince. Yilang nodded. You're not bad. After I become the prince I'll need 10 personal guards. From now on you'll be my personal guard. Hearing this, Zhang Mu was overjoyed and quickly bowed deeply. This subordinate is willing to go through water and tread on fire for the prince, even if it means death. Yilang nodded. Drag him away. This person is causing trouble in the ancestral hall. Do not hold back. Understood? Zhang Mu glanced at Yilang and when he saw the killing intent in Yilang's eyes, he understood. He immediately grabbed Yiling's hair and dragged her out. At this time Zhang Mu seemed to have seen something and he suddenly stopped. Within the ancestral hall, everyone turned their heads to look outside. Not far from the ancestral hall, a young man was walking towards the ancestral hall. He was wearing a tight-fitting robe that was tattered and covered in blood. This person was Yi Xian who had rushed back from the Nanshan. Seeing Yi Xian, Yilang's lips curled into a cold smile. Inside the ancestral hall, all the elders frowned. The Great Elder's eyes narrowed and his face darkened. No one knew what he was thinking. From afar, when Yi Xian saw Zhang Mu dragging Yiling, his face turned savage. Who gave you the guts to touch my sister? When Zhang Mu saw Yi Xian, his face changed. He quickly looked at Yilang and was about to speak. At this time Yi Xian leaped in front of him like a ferocious tiger. Before the latter could react, Yi Xian's fist landed on his face. Zhang Mu felt a wave of dizziness and he stumbled and fell. Yilang did not stop there and he charged towards Zhang Mu again. At this time Yilang suddenly roared, Yi Xian, he's my man, how dare you? Yi Xian suddenly stepped on Zhang Mu's chest. Pooh! Zhang Mu spat out a mouthful of blood. Seeing this, Yilang's face turned ugly, while Yi Xian lifted his head to look at him, asking savagely, your man? As he spoke he stomped on Zhang Mu's face. Zhang Mu's face turned into a bloody mess as he screamed, Prince, save me. Yi Xian did not care about Zhang Mu as he walked to Yiling's side. Seeing Yiling's state, Yi Xian felt as though his heart was being sliced by a knife. He clenched his fists and his entire body trembled. When Yiling saw Yi Xian, tears welled up in her eyes. Brother, it hurts, it hurts. Hearing this, Yi Xian's expression turned savage. In the next instant he charged in front of Zhang Mu and kicked Zhang Mu's head. Ping! Chapter 1142. Half a month. At this moment Yi Xian really wanted to die. However, he still gritted his teeth and held on. Just like what Tendo said, if he didn't hold on, did he really have to let others help him? Thinking of this, Yi Xian gradually calmed down. Wasn't it just physical pain? What's the big deal? Yi Xian suddenly opened her eyes and looked at Tendo, roaring, "That's it? Is there anything more powerful?" Tendo blinked her eyes. "Of course there is." Saying that, she waved her right hand, and from the depths of the lightning pool, pitch-black divine lightning suddenly swam up like little snakes. Sensing the black divine lightning, Yi Xian's expression instantly changed. She hurriedly said, "F***C, big sister, don't. I was just joking. I was wrong." At the side of the lightning pool, Tendo squatted down and looked at Yi Xian, her face full of smiles. Within the lightning pool, Yi Xian's screams could be heard. He also wanted to not scream. After all, this was really a bit embarrassing, but he really couldn't bear it. This was too painful. At this moment, Yi Xian's immortal body had already been broken, but for some reason the divine lightning didn't damage his physical body. Of course, at this moment he couldn't care so much anymore. After a long time, Tendo already started to roast fish. She would occasionally glance at Yi Xian in the lightning pool. And within the lightning pool, Yi Xian was already like a man of lightning. His entire body was emitting lightning. At this moment, Xiao Dao suddenly appeared beside Tendo. Tendo smiled. "You don't feel at ease with him?" Xiao Dao looked at Tendo. "Many times I have been thinking what would happen if you gave up on this universe." Tendo suddenly became quiet. After a moment, Tendo smiled. "What would happen if you gave up on hatred?" "Hatred?" Xiao Dao suddenly clenched her fists, her expression incomparably cold. "How can I give up on blood hatred? But you are different from me." The Tendo chuckled. "The essence is the same. There are always some things that people can't let go of. If we can let go of everything, what's the point of living?" After a moment of silence, Xiao Dao said softly, "I feel that you can go to a bigger stage. You are the spirit of the Tendo no matter where you go." The Tendo suddenly interrupted Xiao Dao. "This is home." Xiao Dao looked at Tendo. Tendo chuckled and said, "This is the place where I was born and raised." Xiao Dao was silent. Tendo turned his head and looked at the pool of lightning. He said softly, "He is a good seedling. Unfortunately, fate plays tricks on people. So much karma has been imposed on him. To him it is unfair." Xiao Dao looked at Yi Xian. "But this karma also brought him benefits, didn't it?" The Tendo suddenly said, "Have you ever thought about it? If there was no karma, he would be himself without any support. What do you think his life would be like?" After a moment of silence, Xiao Dao said, "He wouldn't be too bad, but he wouldn't be as good as he is now." The Tendo shook his head. "You're wrong." Xiao Dao looked at Tendo. Tendo smiled. "Without those karma he can go further." Xiao Dao looked straight at the Tendo. "Are you talking about his talent and temperament?" "His talent is not bad and his temperament is also top-notch. However, without those people, there are many things that he wouldn't have been able to come into contact with. In other words, it's not something that he can come into contact with now. Think about it, how many swordsmen can get pointers from someone who has reached the peak of swordsmanship from the start?" She paused, then continued, "Regardless of whether we admit it or not, just like what that person from the upper realm said, there is a fact, and that is one's birth is very important. Some people work their whole lives to get what they have, while others are born with it." The Tendo smiled. "What you said is very reasonable, but you've overlooked one thing." Xiao Dao looked at the Tendo. "Please advise me." The Tendo turned to look at Yi Xian in the lightning pool and smiled. "Do you know what happened to him in Green City?" Xiao Dao said softly, "I do." The Tendo smiled. The plain-dressed woman should have recognized him long ago, but she didn't choose to meet him from the start and teach him swordsmanship. "Do you know why?" Xiao Dao narrowed his eyes. "You're saying that she's testing him?" The Tendo shook his head. "She should be letting him choose his own life. If he's willing to be ordinary or if his temperament isn't good, the plain-dressed woman should give him a life of wealth and then leave quietly. Is this path of martial Dao something that ordinary people can walk? No, it's not something that ordinary people can walk. And the plain-dressed woman chose to come forward. Obviously she wants him to walk this endless path. Why does the plain-dressed woman think that he can walk this path?" Xiao Dao was silent. The Tendo smiled. "Since ancient times, a true peerless powerhouse can't do without one thing. This thing is not talent but hard work. They don't admit defeat, they dare to fight, they can endure hardships that ordinary people can't, and they have a firm mind. He fits these requirements, so the plain-dressed woman brought him on this path." Otherwise, do you really think that her sword can't cut off the karma on him? Not to mention the prophet's karma, even his mother. At this point she suddenly frowned. In the next moment, a trace of blood slowly flowed from the corner of her mouth. Xiao Dao's expression changed. The Tendo wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth and smiled. I've spoken too much. Xiao Dao said in a deep voice. She did it. The Tendo shook his head and smiled. It's not the plain-dressed woman. It's another source of karma. Xiao Dao frowned. Isn't his mother Zhou Xian? The Tendo asked in return, then where is she now? Hearing this, Xiao Dao was stunned. The Tendo smiled. He's much more complicated than we think. Not to mention anything else, I know why his mother disappeared. Because if she doesn't disappear, she will die. Just like the prophet back then. Do you really think that the prophet wants to disappear? No, he doesn't want to disappear at all. Who doesn't want to live? Of course he's not that lucky. He must disappear because he has gone too far. Moreover, he has severely underestimated the plain-dressed woman's strength. This woman watches everything coldly from the sidelines, but when it's time to act, she doesn't show any mercy. As she said this, she looked up at the sky and said softly, have you noticed that this vast starry sky is like a huge chessboard and all living beings are the chess pieces? Hearing this, Xiao Dao's expression gradually became solemn. The Tendo smiled and said, as the saying goes, the Tendo is heartless and treats all living beings as straw dogs. Actually, humans have some misunderstandings about this saying. This universe, which is also this heaven and earth, treats all living beings the same. It doesn't treat anyone especially good or especially bad. Everything develops naturally. In other words, no matter what happens to all living beings, it's all their own actions, including luck. All of this has nothing to do with heaven and earth. Heaven and earth let nature take its course. The ones who really interfere with the fate of all living beings are humans themselves. As she said this, she looked at Xiao Dao. Humans are becoming stronger and stronger. They are strong enough to destroy the universe and change the rules. Some even stronger experts can decide the life and death of all living beings with a single thought. Some people use heaven and earth as a chessboard and all living beings as chess pieces, trampling on all living beings. At the end of the day, humans are playing with themselves. It has nothing to do with heaven and earth. Xiao Dao turned to look at Zhou Xian in the lightning pool and fell silent. The Tendo suddenly smiled and said, I suddenly feel a little emotional. This universe nourishes all living beings in the universe, but in the end there won't be a good result. Of course, this involves ethics and human nature, so I won't say more. After a moment of silence, Xiao Dao turned and left. At this moment, the Tendo suddenly said, Xiao Dao. Xiao Dao turned to look at the Tendo. The Tendo smiled slightly. Perhaps we won't meet again soon. Now I want to give you a message. Do you want to hear it? Xiao Dao nodded. Speak. The Tendo said softly, kindness. The little Taoist smiled and said, do you want me to be kind? The Tendo nodded. Those who are kind should not be contaminated with evil karma. Xiao Dao was silent for a moment and nodded. I'll remember it. After saying this, she turned and disappeared into the horizon. The Tendo picked up the roasted fish in front of her and gently nibbled on it. About 10 days later, Zhou Xian in the lightning pool had calmed down. He didn't roar anymore. Beside the lightning pool, the Tendo sized up Zhou Xian. She waved her right hand and in an instant, the lightning retreated like the tide. Around Zhou Xian, countless lightning flashed. He looked like a man made of lightning. At this moment, Zhou Xian opened his eyes. 2 lightning flashed in his eyes. Before these 2 lightning bolts could reach the Tendo, they disappeared without a trace. Zhou Xian was a little excited. Is it done? The Tendo shook her head. This is just the first step. You still have many more steps to take. Now feel your body. Zhou Xian nodded. He clenched his fists. In an instant, a powerful lightning swept out from his body. The surrounding space was directly shattered by these lightning bolts. Not only that, he felt some changes in his body. There were many small lightning spots on his body. Zhou Xian looked at the Tendo. The Tendo smiled. Your body already has the lightning attribute. Now you are immune to all lightning. Zhou Xian frowned. Immune to all lightning? The Tendo nodded. Not only are you immune to all lightning, but you can also absorb all the lightning attribute power. In the future, any heavenly tribulation will be like a tonic to you. Moreover, it's a tonic. And the kind that is very nutritious. Yi Xian blinked. So powerful? The Tendo smiled. Of course. However, it is far from enough. Come, let's go somewhere else. Yi Xian frowned. I haven't mastered it yet? The Tendo shook his head. Far from it. Although your body has strengthened a lot, it is still far from enough. Moreover, it is useless to have a strong body. You also need something special. Yi Xian was a little puzzled. What special? The corner of the Tendo's mouth curled up. Overlord body. Yi Xian frowned. Overlord body? Tiandao smiled and said, you can absorb the thunder attribute now, but if you can also absorb the fire attribute, water attribute, earth attribute. That's right, I want to forge you into a 5 elements extreme physique that no one has ever cultivated before. The 5 elements extreme body will be invulnerable. You will absorb whatever comes. Yi Xian was speechless. Chapter 1143. 5 Elements Extreme Physique. Yi Xian's blood was boiling. If what Tendo said was true, wouldn't this physique be invincible? He would absorb everything that came his way. Plus, he was already a sword physique. Yi Xian's blood was boiling at the thought of this. Yi Xian thought of something and looked at Tendo. Has anyone cultivated it before? Tendo shook her head. No one. Yi Xian was puzzled. Why? The heavenly Tao blinked. Because this was invented by me, so no one has cultivated it before. Yi Xian was struck dumb. Then he said, I'm the first one? Tendo nodded. Yi Xian was speechless. Tendo smiled. You can reject it. I won't force you. After all, it is dangerous. However, if you succeeded in cultivating it, it would be very, very powerful. Think about it, all the divine powers and spells are within the 5 elements. If you cultivate the 5 elements extreme physique, how many people can hurt you? Other than that, I can also strengthen your sword body and your Dedine spirit body. In fact, I can even research and use my resources to help you strengthen some other attributes such as sabers, spears, etc. After all, I am quite proficient in these things. Of course. She looked at Yi Xian and said seriously, you can reject it. After all, it is dangerous. I can understand. Yi Xian's mouth twitched. Reject? At this moment he wanted to beat someone up. This woman was invincible. Tendo blinked. Cultivate? Yi Xian hesitated. Since you want me to cultivate it so strongly, then let's cultivate it. Tendo was puzzled. I don't want it so strongly. It is up to you whether to cultivate it or not. Yi Xian suddenly said seriously, don't say it. I understand. I understand. Deep down you want me to cultivate it. After all, there are very few people as outstanding as me in this world. Without me, you won't be able to find anyone else suitable. Sai, we have known each other for a long time. How can I not help you? I'll fix it. Tendo was dumbfounded. Was that so? Yi Xian suddenly grabbed the Tendo's arm and said, don't worry about these small problems. Come on, let's go cultivate. Tendo. After a while, Tendo brought Yi Xian to the top of a volcano. Yi Xian bent down and looked down. Below him was boiling lava. Yi Xian looked at Tendo. Normal fire might not work on me. Tendo smiled and said, I know, there is a mysterious flame at the bottom of the magma. Yi Xian's eyes lit up. What flame? Tendo looked down and said softly, Heavenly flame. Heavenly flame? Yi Xian was puzzled. What kind of fire is that? Tendo smiled and said, at the beginning of chaos, some mysterious flames came from beyond the heavens, so it is called heavenly flame. Yi Xian pointed to the upper realm. Flames from above? Tendo shook her head and smiled. Not really. Anyway, it's from beyond the heavens. Yi Xian asked again, where is beyond the heavens? Tendo looked at Yi Xian and raised her fist. Do you know how powerful my punch is? Yi Xian's expression changed and he quickly shook his head. I don't know. Tendo's lips curled up slightly. Do you want to know? Yi Xian shook his head. I don't want to know. Tendo smiled and pointed below. Go down. Yi Xian looked down. This time he did not hesitate and directly jumped into the magma. Boom. The moment he jumped in, the magma shot out and instantly drowned Yi Xian. In the magma, Yi Xian looked at his body. His body was completely fine. Just as he said, ordinary flames had no effect on him. At this moment, from the depths of the magma, A blue flame suddenly rushed out and directly entered his chest. Boom. In an instant Xian's entire body directly burned. Xian's eyes were wide open. At this moment he felt that his body was about to turn into ashes. And at this moment, Tendo suddenly opened her palm. In her palm an ice lotus the size of a thumb appeared. She bent her finger and the ice lotus turned into a white light and appeared above Xian's head. The moment the ice lotus appeared, the flames on Xian's body immediately dimmed, but they did not disappear. At this moment Xian was in even more pain. If it was said that he was burning in a raging fire before, now he was slowly stewing over a small fire. Xian clenched his teeth and stubbornly held on. He was still able to endure physical pain. In the sky, Tendo glanced at Xian, then she took out an ancient book and sat down to read. Just as she said, she never forced Xian. Xian could give up at any time. Whether he gave up or persevered, it all depended on Xian. Below, within Xian's body, a flame was constantly roaming. This flame did not destroy his body, instead, it was slowly merging with him. Just like the divine lightning. Of course, this was because of Tendo. Without Tendo, if he dared to let this heavenly flame enter his body, he would be courting death. Just like that, time passed bit by bit. About 10 days later, Xian's body had already turned into a ball of blue flame. Under this ball of flame, the magma around him had already started to disappear bit by bit, and the rest of the magma did not dare to approach him. At this moment Xian suddenly opened his eyes. In his eyes 2 flames burst out. In the next moment he directly turned into a flame and soared into the sky. At this moment, Tendo was no longer at the top of the volcano. In the sky Xian glanced around. In the end he directly turned into a flame and disappeared on the spot. By a river Xian found Tendo. Tendo was catching fish. As soon as Xian reached the river water directly boiled. At the same time the surroundings directly burned, including the space. At this moment, Tendo suddenly appeared in front of Xian. In the next moment she and Xian directly appeared at the top of the volcano. Tendo looked at Xian. You can't control this flame yet. As she spoke, her right hand lightly pressed on Xian's shoulder. Boom. The flame in Xian's body was directly suppressed. Tendo said again, whether it is the divine lightning or the heavenly flame, it is not something that you can control perfectly now. Xian said in a deep voice, then what should we do? Tendo smiled and said, we can let them restrain each other. Xian was a little puzzled. What do you mean? Tendo smiled and said, the 5 elements reinforce and restrain each other. Do you understand? Hearing this, Xian understood. 5 elements extreme body. He still lacked a few other types. Tendo said softly, let's go. After speaking, she turned and left. About half an hour later, Xian followed Tendo to the top of a snowy mountain. Tendo led Xian towards the depths of the snowy mountain. Although it was bone-chilling all around, Xian still felt hot all over his body. He knew that it was because of the heavenly flame. After walking for about a quarter of an hour, Tendo suddenly stopped and pointed at an ice cave not far in front of them. Tendo smiled and said, let's go in. Xian looked at the ice cave and asked, what is inside? Tendo smiled and said, ice soul. Xian was about to ask when Tendo suddenly said, ice soul is a kind of spirit cultivated from ice. This ice soul is the first one in our 5th dimension and also the last one. This is because the spiritual chi in this universe is not enough to cultivate an ice soul. Xian asked, why? Tendo smiled and said, because the spiritual chi is not enough. Moreover, most of the spiritual chi has been absorbed by humans. Just like here, how much spiritual chi is left here? Xian looked around. The spiritual chi in this place was extremely thin. It was not suitable for cultivation. Tendo pointed at the ice cave and said, go in. Xian said in a deep voice, Miss Tendo, I have absorbed the fire soul and ice soul. Do they still exist? Tendo nodded and said, naturally they will coexist with you. In the future, if you go further and do not need them, promise me that you will give them a good home. It is not easy. Xian looked at Tendo and nodded. Tendo said with a smile, go in. Xian nodded and walked into the ice cave. Just as he entered the ice cave, a white light suddenly flew towards him. Xian was about to resist, but the white light directly entered between his eyebrows. Boom. Yi Xian's body trembled violently. The next moment his body started to freeze bit by bit. Yi Xian did not panic. Just as his body was about to completely freeze, the heavenly fire appeared again. Soon the coldness on his body dissipated a bit. Ice and fire collided. Outside the ice cave, Tendo looked at Yi Xian and said, "Guide them and let them reach a perfect balance in your body. As long as you can do this, you will pass this test." Yi Xian nodded and sat cross-legged on the ground. Then he began to guide the heavenly fire and ice soul in his body. Fortunately, the heavenly fire and ice soul were quite compatible, so his guidance was quite smooth. Tendo also walked into the ice cave. She found that Yi Xian's body was half ice and half fire. She looked at Yi Xian and said softly, "This cultivation method is something I came up with on a whim. I'm not sure what will happen. But in theory it is feasible. Now we need to put it into practice. If it really works, then your body will become a body of attributes. This kind of physique is no longer a simple body cultivator. There will be very few people who can pose a threat to you. Of course, the premise is that you can succeed." Yi Xian opened his eyes. At this time Tendo said, "Don't talk. Guide them well and let them live in peace in your body." Yi Xian nodded slightly. He closed his eyes and focused on guiding. Just like that, time passed bit by bit. In the cave, Yi Xian's body kept changing. Sometimes it was fire, sometimes it was ice. After an unknown amount of time, Yi Xian suddenly opened his eyes. In his eyes, one was ice and one was fire. Not only that, there was also lightning flashing. Yi Xian looked at Tendo. "Did you succeed?" Tendo was about to speak. At this moment, a powerful flame suddenly swept out from his body. The next moment, a cold wave suddenly appeared. Yi Xian's body was directly in the sky of ice and fire. Tendo said softly, "There seems to be a problem." Chapter 1144. Something's wrong. Yi Xian was dumbfounded. Right at this moment, Tendo's right hand suddenly pressed on his body. In an instant, a powerful force directly suppressed the ice soul and heavenly fire in his body. However, Yi Xian was still half ice and half fire. Yi Xian asked, "What's going on?" The Heaven Dao thought for a moment and said, "You haven't guided them well. Ice and fire are two completely different subordinates. You have to make them reinforce and counteract each other, and you can't allow them to temporarily attain a form of balance. If it's like that, then they'll devour you the moment you touch them." Yi Xian said in a deep voice, "How can I make them reinforce and subdue each other?" Tendo smiled and said, "Use your body as a medium. As for how to make them reinforce and subdue each other, you have to figure it out yourself." "Figure it out yourself." Yi Xian was speechless. Tendo smiled and said, "Let's begin." Yi Xian didn't waste any more time. He slowly closed his eyes and started to guide the ice soul and heavenly fire in his body again. It has to be said that this process was quite painful. Because once these two energies came into contact, they would produce an extremely powerful force that would pose a great threat to his body. Therefore he didn't dare to be careless. Now that these two energies were subduing each other, what he had to do was to make them reinforce each other. Time passed bit by bit. About 3 days later, the two energies in Yi Xian's body began to converge in his body. However, they didn't come into contact with each other. Therefore, from the outside, one would notice that his body was sometimes covered in flames and sometimes covered in ice. One day later, Yi Xian was able to calmly control these two completely different energies. Yi Xian stood up and walked out of the ice cave. Tendo looked at him and said with a smile, "You succeeded?" Yi Xian nodded. He opened his palms. In his left hand there was a ball of flame and in his right hand there was a piece of ice. Tendo smiled slightly, "Very good. Come, let's go to the next place." The two of them walked away. As soon as they left, Yi Xian suddenly realized that the icebergs behind him were slowly melting. Tendo suddenly said, "It's normal. If it wasn't for the ice soul here, this 10,000-mile ice mountain would have dissipated countless years ago." Yi Xian said in a deep voice, "Miss Tendo, there's something I'm curious about. Can I ask you?" Tendo nodded. "Go ahead." Yi Xian looked at Tendo. "In the beginning, when humans first appeared in this universe, you had the ability to kill them, didn't you?" Tendo shook his head. "The humans who first appeared in this world were outsiders." "Outsiders?" Yi Xian frowned. "From the upper realm?" The Tendo said with a smile, I don't know where these guests are from. As for the question you just asked, I can answer you because I'm too kind. Too kind. Xian glanced at Tendo and didn't speak. Tendo said softly, in the beginning I didn't expect that the humans in this universe would cause so much damage to the universe. She paused for a moment and continued, of course there's another reason. I was too naive at that time. I thought that humans are good by nature. Everyone is kind, but I underestimated human nature. Of course, since ancient times there have been many good people. Not all people are bad. There have been many outstanding humans in this world and I have great respect for some of them. Xian said in a deep voice, what if this universe is destroyed? Tendo said with a smile, if it's destroyed then so be it. Nothing is everlasting. Of course I will do my best to protect it. If I fail it doesn't matter. At least I will try my best. Xian nodded slightly. I understand. Tendo looked at Xian and said, you have to understand something. Sometimes destruction isn't true destruction but rebirth. Just like your body. If it hadn't been destroyed countless times, how could it have become so powerful? She pointed around and said, if all the humans in this universe become extinct, after several tens of thousands of years, this universe will be restored to its original state. It will become even better. Of course, it's a bit cruel to make all the humans extinct. However, have you ever thought that if this destruction continues, the spiritual energy of this universe will completely dry up and become a dead universe? At that time, this universe will be completely annihilated, and humanity will still not be able to escape destruction. Xian glanced at Tendo and said, why are you telling me this? Tendo said with a smile, I don't want to change you. I just want to tell you that our universe is currently very weak. It can't withstand the destruction of humanity. Xian was silent. Protect humanity? He had once thought that if it was within his power he wouldn't mind blocking the fifth dimension tribulation. After all, he was a human king. However, there was a fatal problem. Just like Tendo said, even if he blocked the fifth dimension tribulation, would the humans of this universe be safe? The spiritual energy of the universe would dry up and it would eventually perish. At that time, what could he do? The only way was to change. However, how difficult was this change? To make all the cultivators give up their cultivation, let alone others, even he couldn't do it, so why would he make others do it? It was simply impossible. An endless loop. At this time, Tendo suddenly smiled and said, don't think too much about it. All living beings have their own path of return. Everyone has their own destiny. Everything is a cycle of cause and effect. To put it simply, do your best. Xian nodded slightly. Just like Tendo said, it was enough to do his best. Tendo brought Xian to a desert. In the desert, Tendo looked at Xian and said, where is your grand Tao Law? Xian shifted his consciousness and the great Tao Law appeared between his eyebrows. Tiandao gently grabbed the great Tao Law in her hand, and then she placed the great Tao Law in the sand in front of her. In an instant the surrounding sand started boiling. Tendo looked at Xian and said, sit down. Xian nodded and sat cross-legged in the sand. Tendo lightly snapped her fingers. In an instant, boundless power of the earth appeared in the surroundings. This power of the earth was like a tide and gathered towards Xian. Seeing this, Xian's expression changed. He had never seen so much power of the earth. No, this power of the earth was completely different from the power of the earth that he had used in the past. In front of Xian, Tendo suddenly smiled and said, this is the power of the earth's core. Comes from the deepest part of the earth. You have only absorbed the power of the earth's surface. Just as Xian was about to speak, Tendo suddenly said, don't talk. Calm down and absorb this power of the earth. This power of the earth will constantly nourish your body and then form the true armor of the earth in your body. This armor will not be weaker than your human king shield. Of course, the prerequisite is that you can absorb it well. Hearing this, Xian did not dare to be careless. He slowly closed his eyes and began to guide the power of the earth into his body. At this moment he was somewhat glad that his body was strong enough. Otherwise, his body would not be able to withstand this power of the earth. This power of the earth was too formidable. It didn't take long for more and more power of the earth to converge into Xian's body. This power of the earth was easier to control than the ice soul and heavenly flame because the grand Tao Law belonged to him. So everything went smoothly. Right at this moment, Tendo suddenly raised her head, and then she vanished on the spot. It didn't take long for Tendo to arrive in the boundless starry sky, and then a ray of white light suddenly appeared above her. A moment later, a man walked out from within it. It was the martial saint who had fought Arrow that day. The martial saint glanced down. Meanwhile, Tendo waved her right hand lightly, and then an expanse of white light suddenly enveloped Zhou Xian. So the martial saint was unable to see anything. The martial saint gazed at Tendo, and the Tendo smiled and said, "Do you need something?" The martial saint grinned and said, "I came here specially to pay a visit to Miss Tendo." Tendo smiled and said, "Why?" The martial saint bowed slightly and said, "We offended you in the past, please forgive us, Miss Tendo." Tendo smiled and said, "I'm not angry really." The martial saint hesitated for a moment and then said, "We came here to ask Miss Tendo for a favor." Tendo blinked her eyes and said, "What is it?" The martial saint said in a deep voice, "Miss Tendo, let me first declare that we don't have any evil intentions towards the fifth dimension. Our real goal is the bookstore. As long as we obtain the bookstore, I can guarantee to Miss Tendo that we will never step into the fifth dimension again." Tendo frowned slightly and said, "I didn't stop you from seizing the bookstore." The martial saint looked at Tendo and didn't say anything. Tendo said seriously, "I really didn't care about the matter between you two. You can come down at any time and target Zhou Xian at any time." The martial saint hesitated for a moment and then said, "Miss Tendo, do you want us to fight with Zhou Xian until both sides suffer?" Tendo shook her head and said, "No, I hope that you two will die together." The martial saint was speechless. Tendo smiled and said, "This is my true opinion. Of course you two can also shake hands and live in peace. This is what I want to see." The martial saint looked at Tendo and said, "You really won't interfere?" Tendo nodded and said, "Go back and tell them not to worry. If you two fight with Zhou Xian, I will absolutely not interfere." The martial saint was silent. Tendo smiled and said, "If you don't believe me, you can imprison me like before, I don't care." The martial saint looked at Tendo and said, "Miss must be joking." Tendo smiled and then said, "If I didn't guess wrong, you already have a way to deal with Xiao Dao and Arrow. Am I right?" The martial saint nodded and said, "Yes. Now only Miss Tendo is left." Tendo smiled and said, "I promise you now, if you two fight with him, I will definitely not help." "Really?" The martial saint nodded slightly and said, "Many thanks." He paused and then said, "Miss, do you know the true strength of that plain-dressed woman?" Tendo nodded and said, "I do." The martial saint bowed slightly and said, "Please tell me." Tendo smiled and said, "Actually, she's not that powerful. She's just about the peak stage of the Shattering Void tier. Really, I've fought with her before and we're evenly matched. Of course, don't fight her one by one. If you want to kill her, the best way is to send all your elites to attack her together and not give her the slightest chance. Believe me, as long as you all unite and attack together, it won't be difficult to kill her. Really. P.S. Let me say this, if there are criticisms and suggestions in the comments section, I will read them seriously. Everyone, don't scold each other. To be honest, whether it's defending me or scolding me, they all hope that my writing will be better. If no one scolds me, no one criticizes me, then that's my sorrow. There are people scolding me and there are people giving suggestions, which proves that they are still reading my book. Of course, regardless of whether it's Venerable Sword from Heavenly Sword Realm, everyone has to believe me. I Tendo am not only good at boasting. I am serious about writing because this is not only my hobby, but also my livelihood. The readers are not my father and will not always tolerate me. Thus all this time I dare not slack off in the slightest. I thank all the readers for their support and thank all the readers for their company. You're tuning in to the Zhou Xian's Legacy YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.